Hey there, tonight we're diving into the bustling chaos of a medieval market. Not the fairy tale version, you know, but a vibrant reality where haggling is an art form and hygiene is a distant dream. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now get comfortable, perhaps dim the lights, or find that perfect pillow position, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up to the kind of noise that even the most rebellious alarm clock could only dream of making. The clamor outside your window is a cacophony of hooves clattering, vendors yelling, and the occasional bray of a donkey that clearly missed its morning coffee. Welcome to the medieval market, the 14th century answer to the chaos theory, long before anyone knew what that was. As you stumble out of your straw-stuffed mattress, you're hit with the first reality check. Hygiene wasn't exactly topping anyone's list back then. Your nose is immediately assaulted by a complex aroma, a blend of sweat, smoke, and something that might be a mix of old fish and impending regret. Yep, this is not your cozy farmer's market where you pick up organic kale and sip on $1.05 kombucha. This is a full-on sensory assault, and it's only just begun. Out in the street, the market layout greets you with all the organization of a toddler's toy box. Stalls are crammed into every available nook and cranny, spilling over with everything from woolen cloth to suspicious-looking meat pies. It's a free-for-all, like Black Friday without the discounts, or the sense of personal space. And don't even think about zoning laws. Medieval towns were more about, let's see if it fits. Now, let's talk about the economy, which is as straightforward as a plate of spaghetti. Forget about swiping your card or even counting out coins. This is a world where the barter system reigns supreme. Picture this. You want a loaf of bread. No problem if you've got a chicken to trade, or maybe some eggs, or perhaps a favor you owe the baker's cousin's neighbor. Honestly, it's like trying to solve a Rubik's Cube blindfolded. Currency, when it existed, was a hodgepodge of coins from all over, and each one had its own value depending on the day, the weather, or maybe just the vendor's mood. One day, a groat, a silver coin worth 4 pennies, might get you a decent meal. The next day, it might only earn a shrug. Inflation and deflation were just concepts in a medieval game of chance. And talk about bread costing a king's ransom, literally. In 1315, the Great Famine hit Europe, and bread prices soared faster than you can say, ye old price gouging. A loaf could cost half a penny, which might not sound like much until you realized that half a penny was a big deal when you earned less than 2 pennies a day. Suddenly, that stale loaf starts looking like a luxury item. But the barter system wasn't just about survival. It was social currency, too. It was a way to forge connections, build networks, and sometimes get yourself out of a sticky situation. Imagine negotiating a trade with not just goods, but also stories, gossip, and favors. A medieval LinkedIn, if you will. As you maneuver through the market, it's clear that this place is as much about spectacle as it is about commerce. There's a juggler tossing flaming torches, a minstrel strumming a lute with more enthusiasm than skill, and a fortune-teller who looks like she might also be part-time pickpocket. It's all part of the show, a medieval mashup of trade and theater where everyone plays a part. Speaking of parts, let's not forget the smells. The market is a potpourri of olfactory experiences, some delightful, others not so much. The aroma of freshly baked bread mingles with the pungent stench of raw fish, and somewhere, someone is definitely overdoing it with the garlic. It's a reminder that refrigeration is a distant dream, and preservation methods are more about survival than taste. And let's bust a myth while we're here. The medieval market wasn't all about doom and gloom. Sure, it was chaotic and occasionally dangerous, with pickpockets and the occasional bout of the plague to keep things interesting. But it was also a hub of innovation and exchange. Ideas, not just goods, were traded here. It was where you caught up on news from far-off lands, heard the latest ballads, and maybe even picked up a new recipe or two, assuming you had more than just turnips to work with. By the time you've navigated the maze of stalls, dodged a runaway pig, and managed not to trip over a sleeping dog, you're probably ready for a break. But remember, this is a market day, and the medieval clock waits for no one, not even you. So take a deep breath, Brace yourself for more sensory overload and dive back into the fray. Who knows, might just find that elusive deal, or at least a story worth telling back in your own time. As you contemplate diving back into the fray, your stomach chimes in with a timely reminder that you've yet to sample the local delicacies. And let me tell you, medieval cuisine is an adventure all of its own. First things first, say goodbye to any notions of a gluten-free diet. Bread is king here, and wheat is its loyal subject. Forget about almond flour or quinoa, unless, of course, you enjoy living centuries ahead of your time. Let's kick things off with the staple of medieval life, pottage. Picture a thick stew, where the main ingredient is usually whatever happens to be in season, or more accurately, whatever's left in the pantry. It's like the OG, clean out the fridge recipe, only without the convenience of refrigeration. You might find barley, root vegetables, and if you're lucky, a bit of meat. But don't get too excited. This isn't about to replace your favorite 5-star dining experience. It's more about sustenance than savoring, but hey, it gets the job done. Now, you might think medieval food was all bland gruel and dreary dishes. Not so fast. While it's true that the average peasant wasn't dining on Michelin-starred meals, the medieval palate was surprisingly adventurous. Take spices, for instance. These weren't just for flavor, they were status symbols. Spices were so valuable that an ounce of saffron could set you back more than a day's wages. Imagine that. Black pepper was hoarded like gold dust, and nutmeg was practically worth its weight in, well, nutmeg. So, the next time you're casually sprinkling cinnamon on your latte, remember that you're indulging in the medieval equivalent of splurging on a luxury car. But it wasn't all about flaunting wealth. Spices also played a practical role in masking the less-than-ideal flavors of preserved meats. Remember, refrigeration was a future dream, so preserving food often meant salting it until it bore a closer resemblance to a salt lick than a sumptuous steak. In this context, a dash of spice wasn't just a culinary choice, it was a survival tactic. Let's address another myth. The idea that medieval folk had no idea how to cook creatively. This couldn't be further from the truth. Despite limited resources, culinary creativity was alive and well. Chefs, yes, they existed, were concocting dishes that would make your head spin. They might not have had molecular gastronomy, but they certainly knew how to work with what they had. For instance, the noble art of pie making wasn't just about dessert. Meat pies, complete with decorative crusts, were the centerpiece of many a banquet. And if you think American cheese is processed, wait until you hear about the medieval love affair with marchpane, a marzipan precursor that was sculpted into elaborate shapes just to show off. Of course, let's not forget the medieval penchant for the exotic. Trade routes stretching from the Middle East and Asia brought a cornucopia of ingredients that made their way into medieval kitchens. Sugar, for example, was a prized commodity, used sparingly and savored when available. Forget about it as a staple. This was more like a rare treat you hoarded and only brought out on special occasions, or when you really needed to impress the in-laws. And speaking of impressing guests, medieval feasts were events that put our modern dinner parties to shame. Imagine tables groaning under the weight of roasted swans, peacocks presented in their plumage, and dishes so elaborately garnished they could double as art installations. These feasts were less about eating and more about making a statement, a medieval Instagram post, if you will, where each dish was a story of wealth and power. But what about the everyday folk, you ask? Well, their diet was decidedly less fanciful. For the common peasant, meals were functional, centered around bread, pottage, and whatever else could be foraged or grown. Meat was a rare luxury, often reserved for Sundays or special occasions. Fish, on the other hand, was more common, especially for those near rivers or the coast. And if you're imagining a juicy salmon fillet, think again. We're talking whatever the local waters provided, often dried, salted, or smoked to last through the lean times. In terms of beverages, water was often questionable at best, so ale was the drink of choice for many, a safer bet than rolling the dice with potentially dubious water sources. Even children drank ale, although it was much weaker than what you'd find in your local pub today. Wine was also popular, particularly in regions where vineyards flourished. But don't expect a crisp Sauvignon Blanc. Medieval wine could be a bit hit or miss, often spiced or sweetened to improve its sometimes questionable taste. Now, let's take a moment to consider the social dynamics at play here. Food wasn't just sustenance. It was a reflection of one's place in the world. Your diet was a daily reminder of your social standing, with the upper echelons enjoying a far more varied and rich menu than their less fortunate counterparts. The divide between the haves and have-nots was stark, and nowhere was it more evident than at the dinner table. So, as you navigate your way through the bustling market, take a moment to appreciate the culinary landscape of medieval times. It might not align with our modern sensibilities, but it was a world of innovation and adaptation, where necessity truly was the mother of invention. Whether it's the humble pottage or the opulent feasts of the nobility, medieval cuisine tells a story of its own, a story of survival, creativity, and the enduring human drive to make something delicious out of whatever life throws your way. And with that, it's time to continue your market adventure, stomach full and senses reeling, your eyes peeled for more surprises. And remember, in this medieval market, the only certainty is that nothing is certain. As you continue your medieval market escapade, narrowly escaping the clutches of an overly ambitious chicken, seriously, it looks like it's plotting a coup. You're about to discover the intricate social web that holds this chaotic gathering together. It's a world where power dynamics aren't just about who yells the loudest, though that's definitely part of it. No, here, the real power players are the guilds, the merchants, and lurking in the shadows, the ever-watchful authorities. And let's not kid ourselves, the whole concept of Robin Hood swooping in to redistribute wealth, well, that's more of a Hollywood blockbuster than a historical reality. First up, the guilds. Imagine them as the medieval equivalent of a labor union, but with more pomp and a whole lot more influence. These were the folks who controlled the crafts and trades, setting standards, prices, and even who got to sell what. If you wanted to make it as a blacksmith, or a baker, or even a candlestick maker, you had to play by their rules. Each guild had its own set of rituals and ranks. You didn't just walk in and start selling your wares. Nope, you started as an apprentice, graduated to a journeyman, and if you played your cards right, eventually became a master. Think of it as the original LinkedIn profile, minus the endorsements. Why all the kowtowing to the guilds, you ask? Because these organizations wielded serious power. They were the gatekeepers of quality and the protectors of trade secrets. And in a world where everything from shoeing a horse to brewing ale was vital to daily life, quality control was no laughing matter. Guilds ensured that everything met a certain standard, which meant that consumers, who were often at the mercy of unscrupulous vendors, could have some assurance of getting what they paid for. And in return, the guilds ensured their members got a fair price for their goods. It was a system that worked, mostly because the alternative was a free-for-all that made the Wild West look organized. But let's not paint too rosy a picture. The guilds also had a dark side. They could be exclusionary, blocking anyone they didn't deem worthy from entering the trade. They controlled prices and wages, which could stifle innovation and keep the economic pie firmly divided among a select few. So, while they kept markets stable, they also maintained a status quo that wasn't always in everyone's best interest. They were the elites of the medieval market, and like any good elite, they knew how to maintain their grip on power. Now, what about the merchants? These were the middlemen, the ones who brought goods from far-off lands to the local market. They were the lifeblood of trade, connecting distant producers with eager consumers. Merchants were the original globetrotters, braving bandits and rough seas to bring back exotic goods like silk, spices, and precious metals. They were the Amazon Prime of their day, only with more travel time and fewer delivery guarantees. But merchants weren't just in it for the thrill of adventure. They were in it for profit, and they knew how to turn a penny into a pound. They played a dangerous game of supply and demand, buying low in one region and selling high in another. It was risky business, but for those who succeeded, the rewards were great. Merchants could amass substantial wealth, and with wealth came influence. They were power brokers in their own right, often funding local projects or even lending money to cash-strapped nobility. They were the financial engines of the market, driving commerce forward one deal at a time. Of course, where there's money and power, there are also regulations. Enter the authorities, the town officials, tax collectors, and sometimes even the church, all keeping a watchful eye on proceedings. They ensured that markets ran smoothly, that taxes were collected, and that no one got too wealthy or too powerful without paying their dues. It was a delicate balance of power, one that required constant vigilance and occasionally a well-placed bribe. And then we have the romanticized notion of the noble outlaw, epitomized by Robin Hood, the man who supposedly robbed from the rich to give to the poor. Nice story, right? Makes you feel all warm and fuzzy inside. But the truth is, Robin Hood, as we know him, is more legend than fact. The character we adore is a mishmash of folklore, idealized tales, and maybe a handful of historical figures who might have occasionally thumbed their noses at authority. In reality, outlaws in medieval England were often just that, outlaws. Many were less about redistributing wealth and more about surviving in a world that didn't offer many opportunities for upward mobility. The forest wasn't a merry playground, but a hideout, a place where the law's long arm couldn't reach. So next time you hear tales of Robin Hood, remember, while the legend is captivating, the truth is likely a lot more complicated and a lot less heroic. So there you have it, the medieval market, a living, breathing organism of commerce, power, and social maneuvering. It's a place where guilds held sway, merchants thrived, and authorities kept the peace, all while the myths of noble outlaws captured the imagination. As you weave your way through this tapestry of trade and tradition, remember that every stall, every deal, and every story is a piece of the larger puzzle that was medieval life. And while you might not last a day in this bustling bazaar, you've at least got a front-row seat to the greatest show of the 14th century. Keep your wits about you, your purse strings tight, and maybe, just maybe, dodge that chicken one more time. Just when you thought you were getting the hang of this medieval circus, you find yourself face to face with the toll collector, a man who, despite his lack of a velvet rope or a clipboard, could give any modern bouncer a run for their money. His job, to make sure everyone pays their dues just for the privilege of doing business in this chaos. And let me tell you, this guy's presence is about as welcome as a porcupine in a balloon factory. Now, you might be wondering, why on earth would you have to pay for the pleasure of wading through a medieval market, dodging runaway pigs and the occasional flying vegetable? Well, back in the day, tolls were the lifeblood of local economies. They funded everything from road repairs, or what passed for roads, to the salaries of those ever-watchful constables who kept an eye out for pickpockets and other ne'er-do-wells. Think of it as a medieval Kickstarter campaign for civic improvements, only with a lot more arm-twisting. The toll itself varied depending on who you were and what you were selling. If you were a local farmer hawking your cabbages, you might get off lightly, maybe just a few pennies. But if you were a foreign merchant with a cart full of exotic silks, you'd better be prepared for a steeper fee. It was like a sliding scale of market access. Pay up or expect to be shown the exit. And let's not forget the creative accounting that went into these charges. Toll collectors had a reputation for bending the rules more than a medieval contortionist. Rates could vary wildly, depending on everything from your accent to the thickness of your coin purse. The whole system was ripe for exploitation, and many a merchant found themselves on the wrong end of a dodgy deal. But before you start feeling too sorry for these traders, remember that some of them were more than willing to play the game. Smuggling was practically an art form, with merchants hiding goods in secret compartments or bribing officials to look the other way. It was a cat-and-mouse game, with toll collectors trying to catch the slyest of foxes in the market henhouse. And speaking of sneaky dealings, let's not overlook the dark underbelly of medieval commerce. The market was a hotbed of crime, from petty theft to full-blown swindles. Pickpockets were as common as fleas on a dog, and you'd be wise to keep your purse strings tighter than a nun's habit. Losing your hard-earned coin to a nimble-fingered thief was a real risk, and without the luxury of modern-day insurance, it wasn't just an inconvenience, it could be a matter of survival. But crime didn't stop at pickpocketing. There were scammers aplenty, peddling everything from counterfeit spices to watered-down wine. Picture a medieval version of today's email scams, promising you the finest saffron or the rarest silks, only to deliver something that's more sawdust than spice. These con artists were the original snake oil salesmen, and they thrived in the bustling, unchecked chaos of market life. Now, let's delve into the art of haggling, which was both a survival skill and a social dance. Forget fixed prices. Everything was negotiable. Haggling in the medieval market was like participating in a high-stakes verbal joust. You had to be quick-witted, sharp-tongued, and ready to walk away if the price didn't suit you. It was a test of endurance, patience, and sometimes sheer stubbornness. the stakes were high, and the rewards could be great. A successful negotiation might mean the difference between a warm meal and going hungry. But it wasn't just about the goods, it was about reputation. Being known as a shrewd negotiator could elevate your status, while a reputation for being a pushover could haunt you like a bad smell. And here's a fun fact to keep in mind. Haggling wasn't just a necessary evil, it was a form of entertainment. People would gather to watch a particularly heated exchange, cheering on their favorite vendor like a medieval reality show. It was a social event, a chance to see who would come out on top in this gladiatorial arena of commerce. The market wasn't just a place to buy and sell. It was a living, breathing organism of social and economic interaction. It was where you met friends and rivals, where alliances were forged and broken. It was the heartbeat of the town, the place where the wheels of commerce turned and the stories of everyday life played out in real time. So, as you navigate this vibrant, sometimes treacherous world, keep your wits about you. Remember, in a medieval market, the only thing more valuable than your goods is your reputation. As you weave through the throngs of people, dodging both pickpockets and overly ambitious toll collectors, you're not just a participant, you're part of the spectacle. And with that, you continue your journey, purse clutched tightly, eyes peeled for the next opportunity or threat. Because in the medieval market, every corner turned holds the promise of a new adventure, a fresh challenge, and perhaps the story of a lifetime. As the shadows lengthen and the sun dips below the horizon, you're left pondering how people in the medieval market knew when to pack it in without a smartphone to ping them. Well, time back then was more of a suggestion than a rule, loosely tied to the sun's whims. Market days were like an endurance race without a finish line, and as the day winds down, so do the merchants. You can almost hear the collective sigh of relief as they begin to shutter their booths, counting their earnings in a hodgepodge of coins that would baffle even the most seasoned accountant. But don't be fooled into thinking that closing time is a smooth operation. Far from it. It's more like the Angkor of a rock concert, complete with a last-minute frenzy to snag deals or offload unsold goods. Picture vendors trying to entice you with their remaining wares. Buy one, get 3 free. It's like the final sales pitch at a liquidation sale, only with more shouting and less regard for personal space. The market at dusk is a sight to behold, a whirlwind of activity as traders jostle to secure their goods and pack up their stalls, all while keeping one eye on potential thieves eager to nab a leftover treasure. If you thought navigating the chaos during the day was an exercise in survival, try doing it while everyone's literally battling against the clock, or at least the fading light. But closing time isn't just about the hustle, it's also steeped in tradition. Many markets had rituals to signal the end of the day, like the tolling of a bell or the blowing of a horn. These were the medieval equivalents of a mall's closing announcement, telling everyone it was time to wrap things up and head home. And let's not forget the local authorities, who patrolled the market to ensure everyone vacated in an orderly fashion, or as orderly as humanly possible when dealing with an unruly mass of traders and customers. Now, while the market might be shutting down, the business of life continues. The evening is when stories are swapped, deals are recounted, and lessons are learned. You can almost hear the conversations echoing through the narrow streets as people discuss the day's highs and lows over a mug of ale. It's a chance to decompress and reflect on the day's successes and failures, a medieval version of post-game analysis. But as much as these markets were a cacophony of commerce, they were also crucial social hubs. They were places where news was exchanged and alliances were forged. The importance of fairs and markets in medieval society can't be overstated. They were the beating hearts of their communities, the places where people came together not just to trade goods, but to trade ideas. They were the social media of their day, minus the trolls and cat memes. And speaking of fairs, these events were the Super Bowl of medieval markets. Think of them as megamarkets that drew crowds from miles around. Fairs were often tied to religious festivals or important city dates, and they brought a level of excitement that made regular market days look like a quiet stroll in the park. Entire towns would transform into bustling hubs of activity, with merchants setting up elaborate displays to lure in customers. And the entertainment, jugglers, minstrels, and acrobats all vying for attention, turning the fair into a sensory overload of sights and sounds. Fairs also held a special economic significance. They were the lifeblood of long-distance trade, offering a rare opportunity for merchants to conduct business on a grand scale. Guilds would play a major role, setting up shop to showcase their finest goods and services. And for many, attending a fair was a once-in-a-lifetime event, an opportunity to see and experience things they couldn't even dream of in their everyday lives. It was like attending a World Expo, only with more mud and fewer pavilions. But as romanticized as these fairs might seem, they were also rife with challenges. The sheer volume of people meant a rise in crime and disease, and the logistics of setting up and maintaining such a large event were nothing short of a medieval logistical nightmare. The authorities had their hands full trying to maintain order, ensuring that the influx of visitors didn't overwhelm the local resources. And let's not forget the economic impact. These fairs could make or break a town's fortune. A successful fair meant prosperity, while a poorly attended one could spell financial ruin. It was a high-stakes game that kept everyone on their toes. As you stand at the edge of the now-emptying market, reflecting on the day's events, it's clear that this chaotic, vibrant world is a microcosm of medieval life itself. The market represents the intersection of commerce, community, and culture, a place where the practicalities of daily life collided with the dreams and aspirations of those who lived it. It was a world of opportunity and risk, of tradition and innovation. In a way, the medieval market was a precursor to our modern economy, complete with its own set of rules and players. While we might have traded our bartering for digital transactions and our bustling stalls for online shopping carts, the essence remains the same. We are still driven by the need to connect, to trade, and to share. Only now, we do it with a click of a button rather than a shout across a crowded square. So why, you might ask, would anyone choose to brave such chaos when they could simply shop from the comfort of their own home? Well, despite the noise and the grime, the market offered something that Amazon or eBay never could, an unparalleled sense of community and connection. It was a place where every transaction was personal, where every deal was a story, and where the human experience was as much a part of the exchange as the goods themselves. And as you finally find your way out of the market, weary and ready to collapse, you carry with you a newfound appreciation for the resilience and ingenuity of those who navigated this world long before online shopping was even a glimmer in someone's eye. While you might not last a day in a medieval market, you've survived the journey, emerging with tales to tell and a deeper understanding of the world that came before. In the end, the medieval market was more than just a place to buy and sell. It was a testament to human tenacity, a reminder that even in the most chaotic of environments, people find a way to thrive. And as you head back to your own time, perhaps a little more grateful for the conveniences of modern life, remember that the stories of the past are woven into the fabric of our present. They remind us of where we've been, guide us in where we're going, and keep us grounded in the rich tapestry of human history. If you think the modern corporate world is ruthless, let me introduce you to ancient Persia's version of a hostile takeover, the rise of the Sassanid Empire. We're talking about a time when mergers weren't sealed in air-conditioned boardrooms, but on the battlefield, with sharp swords and sharper strategies. The story kicks off with the Parthian Empire, a sprawling empire that was once the toast of ancient Persia, falling apart like a badly constructed Jenga tower. You see, by the early 3rd century AD, the Parthians were in a bit of a pickle, dealing with internal squabbles that would make your average dysfunctional family gathering look like a yoga retreat. Enter Ardashir I, an ambitious local ruler with the kind of single-minded determination that would make a Silicon Valley entrepreneur blush. Ardashir hailed from a place called Istakhar in present-day Fars province, and he had a vision that involved revamping the old Persian Empire into something shinier and more efficient, kind of like upgrading from a broken-down station wagon to a sleek sports car. The Parthians, bless their hearts, were too busy bickering among themselves to notice Ardashir's rising power, until it was too late. Now, let's not romanticize Ardashir as some benevolent hero riding in to save the day. This was a guy who knew how to play the Game of Thrones, and we're not talking about the HBO kind. He used strategic marriages like a chess master, aligning himself with powerful families to strengthen his claim. His own marriage to the daughter of a local ruler was less about love and more about leveraging alliances. And when he wasn't wooing potential allies, he was busy conquering territories. Talk about multitasking. By 224 AD, Ardeshir had had enough of playing second fiddle. He decided it was time for a showdown with the Parthian king, Artabanus Roman IV. The two clashed at the Battle of Hormazgan, and spoiler alert, Ardeshir came out on top. Artabanus was killed, and with that, the Parthian Empire, which had reigned for nearly 500 years, crumbled faster than a cookie dunked in hot tea. Ardeshir wasn't just content with victory. He declared himself the King of Kings, a title that screamed, "I've made it," louder than any modern-day social media announcement. But don't be fooled into thinking this was just another case of one ambitious guy grabbing power. Ardeshir's rise marked the beginning of the Sassanid dynasty, which would go on to rule for over 4 centuries, until 651 AD, shaping not only Persia, but leaving a mark on the world. They brought a renewed sense of Persian identity, harking back to the glory days of the Achaemenids, and they weren't shy about making sure everyone knew it. The Sassanids invested in grand architecture, revived Zoroastrianism as the state religion, and made sure their coinage, yes, they had their own branded cash, bore the faces of their rulers. Of course, with great power comes great responsibility, or in this case, a series of monumental challenges. The Sassanids had to contend with the Roman Empire to the west, a neighbor as pleasant as a hornet's nest. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Right now, we're focusing on the fact that Ardeshir's coup wasn't just a power grab. It was a seismic shift in the region's political landscape. So why should we care about this ancient game of Risk? Because the rise of the Sassanid Empire is a textbook case of how chaos breeds opportunity. Ardeshir's story is one of seizing the moment, of turning the weaknesses of an old guard into the foundation of a new order. It's a reminder that history isn't just a series of dates and names. It's a living tapestry of human ambition, strategy, and yes, a fair bit of luck. As we continue this saga, keep in mind that the echoes of the Sassanid dynasty are still felt today, a testament to how one man's vision can reshape the world. Now that we've got Ardeshir's meteoric rise out of the way, let's dive into the nitty-gritty of how this new empire actually ran. Spoiler, it wasn't just Ardeshir sitting on a throne, twirling his mustache. No, the Sassanid governance was more like a medieval version of a startup trying to balance its books. Imagine a boardroom where everyone's wearing robes instead of suits, and the PowerPoint slides are clay tablets. Ardeshir, now the King of Kings, because obviously one king wasn't enough, laid the groundwork for a system that would keep power both centralized and flexible. The key, a delicate balancing act between central authority and local autonomy that would make a tightrope walker sweat. You see, Ardeshir and his successors had to ensure that regional rulers, or shahs, felt like they had a say in local matters. Think of it as a medieval version of federalism, but with more swords and fewer filibusters. Sassanids were pretty savvy when it came to power distribution. They knew that keeping everyone happy, or at least satisfied enough not to revolt, was crucial. It was like juggling flaming torches while riding a unicycle. One wrong move, and everything could come crashing down. This dynamic was kind of like a political game of Jenga, where pulling out the wrong piece could lead to disaster. The shahs were allowed to manage their own territories, collect taxes, and enforce laws, but they were still beholden to the central government. It was a system designed to encourage loyalty without stifling local independence. Of course, this wasn't just about keeping the peace. The Sassanids were also keen on making sure the empire ran like a well-oiled machine, and that meant cold, hard cash. The economic structure they put in place was geared towards maximizing revenue, which mostly came in the form of taxes. These weren't your average pay your dues and get on with it taxes. We're talking about a sophisticated system that could rival any modern tax code, complete with exemptions, tariffs, and the occasional loophole for those with the right connections. Now, let's talk about the cultural renaissance that the Sassanids ushered in. They were like the Silicon Valley of ancient Persia, but instead of tech startups, they had a cultural and religious revival. At the heart of this revival was Zoroastrianism, which Ardeshir made the state religion. Zoroastrian priests were like the influencers of their day, shaping not just spiritual matters, but also politics and culture. The Sassanids were all about reviving the glory days of the Achaemenid Empire, and Zoroastrianism was their way of saying, "We're back, baby." Zoroastrianism wasn't just about worshipping Ahura Mazda, the supreme god. It had a profound impact on every aspect of Sassanid life, from the moral code to the legal system. The religion emphasized the duality of good versus evil, a concept that seeped into the empire's ethos like dye into fabric. The Sassanid kings saw themselves as the earthly representatives of this cosmic battle, charged with maintaining the divine order. It was a bit like being a superhero, only without the spandex. This cultural revival wasn't just limited to religion. The Sassanids were patrons of the arts, and their reign saw a flourishing of literature, music, and architecture. They left behind grand palaces and fire temples that were built to last, because if you're going to make a statement, you might as well make it in stone. Their architectural style was characterized by the use of domes and arches, a legacy that would inspire future generations long after the Sassanids had faded into the annals of history. But let's not get too swept away by the romance of a cultural renaissance. The Sassanids weren't just building temples and commissioning poets out of the goodness of their hearts. This was all part of a larger strategy to unify the empire under a single, cohesive identity. A cultural revival was a way to reinforce the idea of Persian superiority, a not-so-subtle reminder to everyone, including their Roman neighbors, that the Sassanids were a force to be reckoned with. Speaking of the Romans, the Sassanids had a bit of a love-hate relationship with them. Picture two neighbors with a long, shared history of grudges and occasional alliances. The Sassanids and the Romans were like frenemies, constantly jostling for power and influence in the region. The border between the two empires was a hotbed of tension, with skirmishes and treaties happening with dizzying regularity. The Sassanids knew that a strong cultural identity was essential in standing up to Roman influence, and Zoroastrianism was their ace in the hole. So, as we wrap up this chapter of the Sassanid story, keep in mind that this was an empire that was as much about brains as it was about brawn. Sure, they knew how to swing a sword, but they also knew the value of a well-crafted policy and a strong cultural foundation. Ardashir's successors took the empire he built and turned it into a powerhouse that would leave a lasting impact on history. They played the Game of Thrones with the kind of skill that would make any modern strategist proud, balancing power, culture, and religion like masters of an ancient chessboard. And while this is just the tip of the iceberg, it's clear that the Sassanids were more than just conquerors. They were visionaries, builders, and above all, survivors in a world where the only constant was change. Now, as the Sassanids turned their gaze westward, they found themselves in a never-ending tug-of-war with none other than the Roman Empire. It was like two heavyweight boxers going at it in a ring that spanned continents. You see, neither side was content to simply hold their corner. They were out for blood, territory, and most importantly, bragging rights. Imagine an era where the border skirmishes between these two empires were as common as your daily cup of coffee, if your coffee came with a side of swordplay and the occasional siege. Let's get into the nitty-gritty of these military shenanigans. The Romans and Sassanids had more battles than a season of Game of Thrones, and each one was a thrilling episode filled with high stakes and dramatic turns. Take the Battle of Edessa in 260 AD, for instance. This wasn't just a scuffle, it was a full-blown spectacle. The Sassanid king Shapurai, a man not content with merely ruling, decided to up the ante by capturing the Roman Emperor Valerian. Yes, he grabbed the top dog himself, like a cat dragging in the prize mouse. Valerian's capture was a PR disaster for Rome and a huge feather in Shapur's peacock plume of a hat. But let's not paint Shapur as just a lucky opportunist. This guy knew his military tactics like a chess grandmaster knows his board. One of the Sassanids' secret weapons was their heavy cavalry, the Savarin. Picture knights in shining armor, but swap out the medieval castles for the open plains of Persia. These guys were the ancient equivalent of a modern-day tank battalion. Armored from head to hoof, they were the cavalry charge that could turn the tide of battle faster than you could say, checkmate. The Sassanids weren't all about brute force, though their military strategies were as multifaceted as a diamond. They employed a mixture of guerrilla tactics, psychological warfare, and good old-fashioned siege warfare to keep their Roman counterparts on their toes. It's like they had a whole arsenal of plays ready to go, and they weren't afraid to use them. For instance, during the siege of Amida in 359 AD, the Sassanids demonstrated their knack for patience and precision, capturing the city after a grueling 73-day siege. It was the kind of long game that would make a poker player proud. And while we're on the subject of sieges, let's not forget the economic context. Wars cost money, lots of it. A single day of battle could cost as much as a year's salary for a small town. Both the Romans and the Sassanids had to constantly balance their war chests, raising taxes and squeezing every last drop of revenue from their provinces. It was a delicate economic ballet, where one misstep could lead to financial ruin faster than you could say overdraft. But why all this back and forth? Why not just draw a line in the sand and be done with it? Well, for one, the territories in question were rich in resources, fertile lands, strategic trade routes, and occasionally the Ard gold mine. Both empires want to control these juicy morsels like two dogs over a bone. More importantly, these territories were the buffer zones, the geopolitical cushions that both empires needed to feel secure in their respective beds at night. The Treaty of Nisibis in 298 AD offers a glimpse into the complexities of this never-ending rivalry. Signed after a series of wars, it was less of a peace treaty and more of a temporary ceasefire. Rome got some territories back, and the Sassanids received recognition of their conquests. It was a classic case of you win some, you lose some, and both sides walked away with a mixture of satisfaction and simmering resentment, ready to pick up the sword again at the slightest provocation. But treaties were like band-aids on a broken leg. They might cover up the wound temporarily, but they didn't solve the underlying issues. The Sassanids and Romans were locked in a cycle of conflict, each clash more intense than the last. This was a time when military prowess was as much about psychological dominance as it was about who held the most ground. The Sassanids knew that every victory, every captured city, was a step towards cementing their reputation as a force to be reckoned with. They weren't just fighting for territory. They were fighting for prestige, for the right to sit at the head table of ancient superpowers. Yet, let's not forget the human cost. Behind the grand strategies and epic battles were the countless soldiers, conscripts, and civilians caught in the crossfire. Whole towns could be razed, populations displaced, and economies shattered. This wasn't just a game of strategy. It was a harsh reality where the stakes were all too real. The Sassanids may have been skilled tacticians, but they were also rulers who understood the brutal calculus of war. So, as the Sassanids and Romans continued their dance of death across the ancient world, it became clear that this was more than a mere clash of empires. It was a saga of ambition, strategy, and survival, a testament to the indomitable will of two civilizations refusing to yield. As we delve deeper into the Sassanid story, remember that this was an age where history was written not just in ink, but in blood, where every battle was a new chapter in the epic tale of power and perseverance. As the dust settled on the battlefields and treaties, temporarily patched up the bruised egos of emperors, the Sassanid Empire turned its attention to something far more lucrative than warfare: trade. You see, while swords and sieges made for great tales, it was the clinking of coins and the rustle of silk that truly greased the wheels of power. Forget the battlefield for a moment. Let's wander down the bustling bazaars of the Sassanid Empire, where commerce was king and the Silk Road was the golden artery pumping prosperity into Persia's veins. The Sassanids weren't just adept at turning the tide of battle, they were also masters of turning a profit. Picture the Silk Road not just as a single path, but as a complex web of trade routes stretching over 4,000 miles from the heart of China to the fringes of Europe. The Sassanid Empire was smack dab in the middle of this network, acting like the world's busiest toll booth. It was a position that would make any modern logistics company drool with envy. Now, let's talk Turkey, or rather, silk, spices, and precious metals. The Sassanids knew that controlling these trade routes was akin to having a license to print money. Caravans laden with silk from China, spices from India, and glassware from Rome all passed through Sassanid lands. Each camel train was a moving treasure trove, and the Sassanids were more than happy to collect their share of the loot with tariffs and tolls that would make your average highway robber blush. The Sassanids' trade prowess wasn't all about taking. It was also about what they brought to the table. Persian carpets, exquisite textiles, and finely crafted silverware were just a few of the high-demand items that found their way into the hands of eager merchants across the world. These goods weren't just commodities. They were status symbols, the ancient equivalent of owning the latest smartphone or designer handbag. But let's not get too carried away with the romance of trade. The Silk Road wasn't some idyllic path lined with friendly roadside stands. It was a cutthroat arena where trade wars were as fierce as any battlefield confrontation. Merchant guilds and trading companies engaged in a high-stakes game of economic chess, outmaneuvering rivals to secure the best goods at the best prices. Competition was fierce, and the Sassanids were right there in the thick of it, playing the game with the kind of shrewdness that would make a Wall Street trader proud. Of course, all this trade activity needed a solid infrastructure to keep it humming along. The Sassanids invested heavily in roads, bridges, and caravanserais, those ancient motels that offered weary travelers and their camels a place to rest. It was an empire-wide construction project that would give any modern infrastructure bill a run for its money. Maintaining these routes wasn't just about ensuring a steady flow of goods. It was also about asserting control over the vast stretches of land that made up the empire. And what about currency? The Sassanids understood that a stable economy needed a stable currency. Enter the drachm, a silver coin that became the economic backbone of the empire. Stamped with the image of the reigning king, these coins were a testament to royal authority and economic stability. The drachm wasn't just a means of exchange. It was a statement, a declaration that the Sassanids were not only a military power, but an economic one as well. Taxation played a pivotal role in the Sassanid economy, too. We're not talking about the kind of half-hearted tax collection you might see on a sitcom. This was a sophisticated system with an army of tax collectors, ready to ensure that the empire's coffers were always full. Land taxes, trade tariffs, and head taxes were just a few of the ways the Sassanids kept the revenue flowing. It was a delicate balance. Squeeze too hard, and you risked rebellion. Too soft, and the empire could find itself running on empty. Now, about those trade wars. They weren't just about goods and gold. They were about influence and control. The Sassanids found themselves in constant economic rivalry with their neighbors, including the Roman Empire. This wasn't the friendly competition of lemonade stands on a suburban street. No, this was a high-stakes duel where each side sought to undercut the other, secure exclusive trading rights, and block competitors from accessing strategic markets. Sound familiar? It's the ancient equivalent of today's tech giants battling for supremacy in the digital age. But let's not forget the people at the heart of this economic engine. Behind every caravan and every crate of spices were the merchants, traders, and artisans who made the system work. These were the unsung heroes of the Sassanid economy, individuals who braved treacherous routes, negotiated deals in far-flung lands, and crafted goods that would be cherished across continents. They were the lifeblood of the trade network, ensuring that the wheels of commerce never stopped turning. So, as we continue to unravel the story of the Sassanid Empire, remember that while battles and conquests grabbed the headlines, it was the quieter, relentless hum of trade and commerce that truly sustained this ancient powerhouse. The Sassanids weren't just rulers with a penchant for grandiose titles and majestic palaces. They were economic strategists who understood that prosperity wasn't just about what you conquered, but about what you could trade, sell, and tax. And as we look ahead, it's clear that the Sassanid legacy of trade and commerce would leave an indelible mark on the world, a testament to the timeless power of economic ingenuity. Just as the Sassanids were riding high on their economic prowess, the winds of change started to blow, a gust worthy of toppling even the mightiest of empires. You see, empires are like Jenga towers. The higher they rise, the more precarious they become, and the Sassanid Empire was about to face a seismic shift that would make even their seasoned rulers break a sweat. Our story of decline begins not with a bang, but with a series of internal hiccups that would snowball into a full-blown crisis. You see, while the Sassanids were busy perfecting the art of the deal, their internal politics were slowly turning into a real-life house of cards. The empire's later rulers struggled to maintain the delicate balance between central authority and local autonomy. It was a political juggling act that saw more than a few balls hit the ground. By the late 6th century, the Sassanid Empire was wrestling with a cocktail of corruption, administrative inefficiency, and noble families who were about as cooperative as a herd of cats on a leash. But why stop at internal strife when you can add a little external pressure to the mix? Enter the Islamic Caliphates, stage left, with a dramatic flair that would put any soap opera villain to shame. The Arabs, united under the revolutionary banner of Islam, were on the move. Driven by religious zeal and the promise of new lands, they were a force of nature that would reshape the political landscape faster than you can say caliphate. It was during the reign of Yazdijerd Roman III, the last Sassanid emperor, that these storm clouds gathered into a full-blown tempest. The empire, already weakened by the Byzantine wars and internal bickering, found itself ill-prepared to fend off the Arab incursions. The Battle of Qadisiyah in 636 AD was a turning point that saw the Sassanid forces routed in a defeat that echoed through the corridors of power like a bad karaoke performance at a state dinner. By 651 AD, the Sassanid Empire, once the toast of Persia, was no more, a sobering reminder that even the mightiest can fall. Yet, the Sassanids left a legacy that far outlasted their political demise. Their influence on Persian culture, art, and architecture is like a rich tapestry woven with threads of history, vibrant and enduring. Sassanid art was a celebration of grandiosity and detail, with intricate metalwork, rock reliefs, and stucco decorations that have inspired artists for centuries. The architectural marvels of the Sassanid era, such as the ancient city of Ctesiphon with its massive iwan, laid the groundwork for Islamic architecture, a fascinating blend of continuity and innovation. In governance, the Sassanids were trailblazers. Their administrative system, which balanced regional autonomy with centralized control, was ahead of its time and served as a model for future empires. Even their coinage, the drachma, continued to influence economic systems long after the empire's political structures had crumbled into dust. But let's not romanticize the Sassanids as benevolent rulers with a penchant for fine art and architectural wonders. They were also masters of propaganda, using grandiose titles and religious revival to maintain a firm grip on power. Their embrace of Zoroastrianism wasn't just about spiritual enlightenment. It was a strategic move to unify the empire under a single religious and cultural identity. The modern equivalent would be a government using social media to shape public perception, only with more fire temples and fewer cat memes. As we wrap up this saga, it's worth pondering the historical lessons that the Sassanid Empire offers. In an age where change is the only constant, the Sassanids remind us that adaptability is key. They were masters of reinvention, turning a crumbling Parthian legacy into a vibrant new order. Yet, their inability to adapt to new external threats marks a cautionary tale of hubris and complacency, a reminder that even the most formidable empires can be undone by their own inertia. So, what does all this mean for us today? Well, if there's one thing the Sassanids taught us, it's that history isn't just about the rise and fall of empires. It's about the people who lived, loved, and fought within them. It's about the art, architecture, and ideas that continue to inspire us. And it's about the timeless human quest for power, identity, and meaning, a quest that, for better or worse, never really changes. In the end, the Sassanid Empire might have crumbled under the weight of its own contradictions, but its legacy endures, a testament to the enduring power of culture and the inexorable march of history. And there you have it, folks, the rise and fall of the Sassanid Empire, a tale of ambition, resilience, and a little bit of chaos. History, after all, is nothing if not a grand tapestry of human triumphs and follies, woven together with the thread of time. In the swirling mists of history, few childhoods are as treacherous as Ivan Roman IV, who later earned the chilling nickname, the Terrible. Born in 1530, Ivan's early years were a blend of nursery rhymes and poison plots. Picture a 3-year-old being handed a crown in 1533. Not your average toddler milestone, eh? This wasn't your typical fairy tale with a shiny, happy ending. More like a medieval version of Survivor, with the stakes up to lethal. Ivan's dad, Grand Prince Vasily Roman III, keeled over from an ulcer when Ivan was just 3. The keys to the kingdom were tossed to this pint-sized royal, which sounds like a recipe for chaos. And oh boy, chaos it was. The real power was held by a regency council, a squabbling nest of boyars. Think Russian nobles with a penchant for backstabbing. These were the kind of folks who probably considered Game of Thrones a fun family show. Imagine the Kremlin corridors, echoing with whispers and the occasional clatter of a fallen dagger. Ivan didn't have to imagine, he lived it. As a kid, he watched his mom, Elena Glinskaya, try to wrestle control from the boyars. She was ambitious, sure, but also a woman in a man's world, like trying to win a chess game with half the pieces missing. She ruled as regent, holding things together with the political equivalent of duct tape and crossed fingers, until 1538, when she died suddenly. Rumor mill says poison. Classic. So there was Ivan, 8 years old, effectively an orphan in a pit of vipers, with everyone either trying to manipulate him or eliminate him. Kind of like a dark comedy, if you're into that kind of humor. The boyars were notorious for their vicious power plays. Imagine a room full of cats with only one mouse to fight over. That mouse was the throne, and it was a bloody scramble. Let's zoom out for a second. 16th century Russia wasn't exactly a postcard. Imagine vast stretches of land, mostly frozen, with a sprinkle of peasants who were more familiar with famine than feasting. Economics were pretty straightforward. If you weren't a boyar, you were likely a peasant, tied to the land, and paying hefty dues to keep the aristocracy in furs and vodka. The economy was as rigid as the Siberian winter. Peasants worked the land for the boyars, who in turn played politics at court. Wealth was concentrated at the top, which, surprise, surprise, led to a lot of disgruntled folks at the bottom. Kind of like the world's most dysfunctional family dinner, where the rich uncle hoards all the mashed potatoes and everyone else goes hungry. Amidst all this, young Ivan grew up with a front-row seat to the theater of betrayal. He learned quickly and harshly that trust was a luxury. The Kremlin was both his playground and his prison, a place where allies could become enemies faster than you could say, "Nigh it." By age 13, Ivan was already showing signs of what would later become his infamous ruthlessness. Talk about a prodigy. If you think about it, Ivan's childhood was the perfect training ground for a future ruler who'd be both feared and loathed. He learned to navigate a world where loyalty was a rare commodity and power was everything. He watched, learned, and waited, like a chess master biding time to strike. As he grew, Ivan started to flex his muscles against his boyar tormentors. Picture a teenager who realized that he could fight back, and did so with a vengeance. By the time he was 16, in 1547, he was crowned Tsar of all the Russias, the first to take the title. He was done playing the pawn and was ready to be the king, or in this case, the Tsar. It was a title that came with unchallenged power, and Ivan embraced it with the enthusiasm of a kid in a candy store, if the candy store also offered a side of authoritarian control. So, Ivan the Terrible wasn't born terrible. He was made terrible by circumstances as cold as a Siberian night, and just as unforgiving. His childhood was a crash course in survival, and he graduated with honors, much to the future dismay of anyone who dared to cross him. So, Ivan had finally snatched the crown, and not just any crown, folks. At the tender age of 16, he donned the title of Tsar of all the Russias. It was 1547, and Ivan was ready to lead, or at least ready to make everyone else think he was. He was the first to officially call himself Tsar, a title that harkened back to the Caesars of Rome. That's right, Ivan wasn't just content with being the head honcho of a few icy territories. He wanted to be the top dog of an empire. Go big or go home, right? With the crown firmly on his head, Ivan decided it was time to shake things up. He looked at medieval Russia, saw a lot of mud huts and outdated systems, and thought, we can do better. It was like trying to install the latest iOS on a Nokia 3310, but Ivan was nothing if not ambitious. First on his list, legal reforms. Enter the Sudebnik of 1550, a legal code that aimed to streamline the judicial process and reduce corruption. Ivan wanted to curb the power of those pesky boyars, and this was step one. Of course, the Sudebnik wasn't just about slapping the boyars on the wrist. It was a comprehensive overhaul. Think of it as a medieval Marie Kondo session for the Russian legal system. It introduced new state courts and standardized legal proceedings. The idea was to give the common folk a bit more say, but like trying to teach a cat to fetch, the results were mixed. The boyars weren't exactly thrilled about losing their grip on local justice. And let's be honest, justice in 16th century Russia was less order in the court and more who's got the sharpest sword. Then there was the Starglev Council of 1551. Ivan gathered the church bigwigs to discuss reforms and align religious practices with state interests. It was like a medieval TED talk on ecclesiastical efficiency. The council produced the Starglev, a set of 100 chapters outlining church governance, aiming to snuff out corruption and unify religious practices. Ivan wanted a church that sang from the same hymn sheet, literally and metaphorically. But as with any grand plan, the execution was far from perfect. The church reforms had all the subtlety of a bull in a china shop, causing friction between clerics and the state. As Ivan was busy rearranging the legal and religious furniture, he also embarked on military reforms. He introduced the Streltsy, a new class of firearm-wielding soldiers, equipped with the latest in 16th century bang-bang technology, muskets. These guys were essentially the SWAT team of medieval Russia, tasked with defending the Tsar and keeping the peace. Ivan's determination to modernize the military made quite the impression, but it also left a loaded musket in the hands of a state that was teetering on the edge of chaos. Spoiler alert, this wouldn't end well. Now, you might think that with all these reforms, Ivan was steering Russia toward a golden age. But history loves a good plot twist. The 1550 saw Russia expand its borders and flex its muscles, claiming Kazan in 1552 and Astrakhan in 1556. Ivan was on a roll, or so it seemed. Yet, beneath the surface, cracks were forming faster than you could say Boris Godunov. You see, Ivan's aggressive expansionist policies and heavy-handed reforms were creating more enemies than allies. The boyars, already unhappy with their diminished power, were starting to murmur discontentedly, and the peasants weren't exactly dancing in the streets. And speaking of streets, let's talk about the Great Fire of Moscow in 1547. Picture this, a city made mostly of wood, a hot summer day, and a spark. It was a disaster waiting to happen, and happen it did. The fire ripped through Moscow, leaving devastation in its wake. Thousands perished, and entire districts were reduced to ash. The city was left with the haunting aroma of charred wood and dashed hopes. It was a fiery reminder that even Tsars couldn't control everything. This wasn't just a physical disaster. It was a political one, too. People blamed Ivan for not having divine favor, and the boyars seized the chance to fan the flames of rebellion. Ivan's response to all this: double down on the reforms and keep pushing forward. He was like a medieval Elon Musk, convinced that revolutionizing the system was the only way to ensure success, even if it meant a few rockets, or boyars, exploded along the way. But here's the kicker. Every step he took to consolidate power and modernize the state also sowed seeds of discord. It was as if he was building a house of cards, only to realize too late that he'd been playing poker with fate. Despite the chaos, Ivan's reign wasn't all doom and gloom. He established the first Russian printing press in 1564, hoping to spread literacy and knowledge. Yet, even this noble endeavor came with its own set of problems. The Orthodox Church wasn't thrilled about the idea of commoners reading, fearing that literacy could lead to heretical thoughts. Plus, books were still a luxury item, about as common as a unicorn in Siberia. But hey, points for trying right. Ivan's attempt to drag Russia into the modern age was like trying to herd cats in a snowstorm, ambitious but fraught with mishaps. Each reform was a double-edged sword, cutting both ways. His efforts to centralize power and standardize the state created an unprecedented level of bureaucracy, which often resulted in more red tape than a failing film festival. For every problem Ivan tried to solve, another seemed to pop up, Hydra style. The unintended consequences of Ivan's reign were as numerous as they were ironic. His quest to weaken the boyars only led to more clandestine plotting. His push for military might birth a standing army that would later become a political force unto itself, and his efforts to bring order to the church sparked a schism that would simmer for decades. It was like watching a medieval sitcom unfold, complete with pratfalls and misunderstandings. So, here we have Ivan, a young ruler with grand designs, trying to steer a medieval juggernaut into the future. His reforms were a mixed bag of brilliance and blunders, with each success shadowed by an unforeseen complication. Amidst the chaos, Ivan continued to rule with an iron fist, determined to leave his mark on history. And leave a mark he did, though perhaps not the one he intended. Stay tuned, because Ivan's story is far from over. We've got more reforms, more battles, and of course, more intrigue in the chapters to come. After all, when it comes to history's great dramas, Ivan the Terrible's reign is just getting started. As Ivan's reign continued, it was time for him to introduce his piece de resistance, the Oprichnina. Now, if Ivan's reign were a movie, this would be the part where things go from intense to downright terrifying, with a soundtrack that's all screeching violins. The Oprichnina was Ivan's answer to rebellion, a chilling mix of personal security detail and terror squad, established in 1565. Imagine a group of men, dressed in black, riding black horses, and carrying brooms and dogs' heads as symbols, sweeping away treason and sniffing out betrayal. Sounds like something out of a horror novel, right? Well, for the Russian boyars, it was all too real. Let's dig into the nuts and bolts of this grim enterprise. The Oprichnina divided Russia into two parts, the Oprichnina itself and the Zemshchina. Ivan kept the best lands for his Oprichnina and left the rest to the Zemshchina, where the boyars still had some influence but were under constant scrutiny. Here's the kicker. Ivan handpicked members of the Oprichnina from the lower nobility and even commoners, folks who owed their entire existence to him and him alone. Talk about loyalty by design. The economic impact, catastrophic with a capital C. Picture this. Entire swaths of fertile land seized and repurposed, leading to the displacement of thousands. Peasants who once worked these lands found themselves uprooted, their livelihoods as stable as a house of cards in a windstorm. The new Oprichnina lands were often mismanaged, leading to reduced agricultural output. This wasn't just a social shake-up, it was an economic earthquake. Ivan's attempt to control the power of the boyars inadvertently destabilized the very foundation of the Russian economy. But before we go labeling Ivan as the villain of the piece, let's unpack the myth of his so-called madness. Sure, Ivan had a reputation for being unpredictable. In 1564, he abruptly abdicated and fled to a monastery, leaving Russia in a state of panic. Classic Ivan, always keeping everyone on their toes. But was he truly mad, or was it all a calculated move? By stepping back, he demonstrated just how crucial his leadership was, forcing the boyars to come crawling back, begging for his return. Some might call it madness, others might call it a masterclass in political theater. However, paranoia was Ivan's constant companion. Surrounded by plots and conspiracies, real or imagined, Ivan saw enemies in every shadow. His childhood had taught him that betrayal lurked around every corner, and the Oprichnina was his answer to that paranoia, albeit a brutally extreme one. It's easy to write him off as a deranged despot, but take a step back, and you'll see a ruler trying to navigate a minefield of treachery with a blindfold on. The real irony, the Oprichnina, meant to solidify Ivan's power, only sowed more discord. Boyars who survived the initial purge were left simmering with resentment. Meanwhile, the common folk, caught in the crossfire of Ivan's policies, fared no better. Famine hit hard in the 1570, a grim reminder that even the most powerful Tsar couldn't control the weather. Add to that the Livonian War dragging on since 1558, draining resources like a never-ending game of whack-a-mole, and you've got a recipe for national exhaustion. Amidst this chaos, Ivan's paranoia ratcheted up another notch. The notorious massacre of Novgorod in 1570 is a prime example. Convinced the city was plotting treason, Ivan unleashed his Oprichniki, who wreaked havoc on the population. The rivers ran red, and the city's prosperity was crushed under the weight of Ivan's suspicion. Was it madness, or a tyrant's desperate attempt to snuff out dissent? Ivan's personal life was no less tumultuous. Picture a royal court where alliances were as fragile as spun glass. Ivan married 8 times, each marriage more turbulent than the last. His volatile temperament and the tragic death of his beloved first wife, Anastasia Romanovna, only fueled his insecurities. Some historians suggest that her death was the catalyst for his descent into paranoia. Losing the one person he trusted pushed Ivan into a spiral, with the Oprichnina serving as both sword and shield against his perceived enemies. Yet, despite the darkness, Ivan was a man of contradictions. Underneath the terror, He was a patron of the arts, commissioning works that would outlast his reign. He established the Moscow print yard, ushering in the age of printed books in Russia. It's as if he wanted to leave a legacy of both fear and enlightenment, a paradox that's as puzzling as it is fascinating. The Oprichnina officially ended in 1572, but its legacy lingered like a spectre over Russian society. It had reshaped the political landscape, leaving behind a country divided and wary. Ivan's grand experiment to consolidate power and purge treason had left scars that would take generations to heal. The boyars who survived were left with diminished power, their influence a shadow of its former self. The common people, caught in the crossfire, bore the brunt of the economic instability and social upheaval. So, what do we make of Ivan the Terrible? A mad tyrant driven by paranoia, or a shrewd ruler navigating a treacherous political landscape? His reign was a masterclass in contradictions, a blend of ambition, fear, and power that left an indelible mark on Russian history. Ivan's story is a reminder that history is never black and white. It's a tapestry of human emotion, ambition, and consequence. As we delve deeper into Ivan's legacy, we'll see how his actions reverberated through time, shaping the Russia we know today. Stay tuned, because the saga of Ivan the Terrible is far from over, and the next chapter promises more intrigue, more battles, and more of the unexpected twists that make history so endlessly fascinating. As Ivan's reign marched on, it was clear that his legacy would be as complicated as a Russian novel with too many characters named Ivan. The Oprichnina's shadow still lingered, but Ivan had new challenges to tackle, specifically the never-ending saga known as the Livonian War. Starting in 1558 and dragging on for a grueling 24 years, this war was Ivan's attempt to gain a foothold on the Baltic Sea. Picture Ivan as a chess player, eyeing that precious coastline like a grandmaster who's had won too many shots of vodka. Why the Baltic, you ask? Control of the Baltic Sea was like holding the keys to Europe's trade routes, a medieval version of owning prime real estate on the monopoly board. Ivan wanted in, and he was ready to flip the table if he had to. But the Livonian War turned out to be more of a money pit than a gold mine. The war sucked resources from Russia like a leech at a blood bank. Despite Ivan's grand ambitions, the Russian military was stretched thinner than a plate of blini, facing off against a coalition of formidable enemies, including Sweden, Poland, and Denmark. It was an expensive affair, with war costs spiraling into the millions of rubles, and it left Russia limping like a bear with a thorn in its paw. Yet, Ivan wasn't entirely out of his depth. He employed some surprisingly modern tactics for his time. He understood the importance of psychological warfare, using fear and propaganda as weapons. Ivan's letters to his adversaries were dripping with threats and bravado, a 16th century version of trash talking. He also attempted to use economic pressure, aiming to disrupt the trade routes of his enemies. But despite these efforts, the war dragged on with all the grace of a three-legged race in a swamp. Meanwhile, as Ivan was busy playing warlord, he also dabbled in international diplomacy, or at least his version of it. One of the more amusing footnotes in his diplomatic escapades was his attempt to woo Queen Elizabeth I of England. Yes, folks, our boy Ivan was aiming high, sending marriage proposals across the continent. Why settle for a local match when you can try to snag the Virgin Queen herself? It was a bold move that reeked of ambition, but alas, Ivan was left on reed. Queen Elizabeth was a shrewd ruler with her own political chess game to play, and getting hitched to a tempestuous Tsar wasn't on her to-do list. Even in the 16th century, ghosting was a thing, proving that some aspects of dating haven't changed much. Ivan's attempts at forging alliances with England weren't entirely in vain, though. He managed to establish diplomatic ties, opening up trade routes that brought English goods to Russia and vice versa. This was a significant achievement, especially given the geopolitical climate of the time. But the marriage proposals, let's just say Ivan's romantic overtures, didn't exactly make the history books for their success. It's a reminder that even Tsars had to deal with the sting of rejection. Back on the home front, Russia's economy was feeling the strain of prolonged warfare. The Livonian War had drained the treasury and left the countryside in shambles. Famine was a frequent visitor, and the peasantry was bearing the brunt of the hardships. It was a classic case of the rulers playing the game while the common folk paid the price. The Russian economy was like a leaky ship, struggling to stay afloat amidst the stormy seas of war and political upheaval. And speaking of ships, let's not forget Ivan's maritime ambitions. He attempted to establish a Russian navy, which was about as successful as trying to build a sandcastle during high tide. The Baltic was a battleground, and Ivan's naval efforts were consistently thwarted by his more seafaring-savvy adversaries. The dream of a Russian fleet ruling the waves was dashed against the rocks of reality. The Livonian War finally wheezed to a halt in 1583 with the Treaty of Plessa, leaving Russia with little to show for its efforts. It had been a costly endeavor, both in terms of lives and rubles, and it left Ivan's realm weakened and weary. The Baltic remained tantalizingly out of reach, a bitter reminder of ambitions unmet. Yet, despite the setbacks, Ivan's reign had undeniably changed the face of Russia. His relentless drive for expansion, his reforms, and his unique brand of leadership had reshaped the country, leaving a legacy as complex and multifaceted as the man himself. As Ivan's reign drew toward its inevitable conclusion, the nation he had both built up and battered was poised on the brink of a new era. The Tsar, who had started his rule as a boy, forced to navigate a web of intrigue and danger, had become a man who left a country grappling with the weight of his ambition and the scars of his paranoia. History, with all its messy contradictions and tangled narratives, would remember Ivan as both a tyrant and a visionary, a ruler whose story was far from a simple tale of good or evil. With the end of the Livonian War, Russia faced a period of rebuilding and reflection. The lessons learned, the alliances formed and broken, and the cultural exchanges initiated would ripple through the centuries. Ivan's reign may have been fraught with turmoil, but it was also a catalyst for change, a tumultuous chapter that set the stage for the Russia that would emerge from the ashes. So, as the curtain falls on this part of Ivan's saga, one can't help but marvel at the audacity of it all. The grand schemes, the audacious proposals, the relentless pursuit of power. The story of Ivan the Terrible is one of epic proportions, a testament to the heights and depths of human ambition and folly. And as we turn the page to the next chapter, there's no doubt that the tale of Russia's first Tsar still has plenty of twists and turns left to unravel. Stay tuned for the next installment, where the legacy of Ivan continues to unfold in unexpected ways. As we wrap up Ivan the Terrible's tumultuous saga, let's sift through the ashes of his reign to determine what truly constitutes his legacy. Ivan's rule was a swirling storm of ambition and terror, a paradoxical dance of horror and progress that left Russia forever altered. But what did he leave behind, and why does he still haunt the corridors of history like a particularly persistent ghost? First, let's talk economics, the unsung hero and villain of every historical drama. Ivan's reign wasn't exactly a fiscal fairy tale. The Livonian War alone cost Russia more rubles than you could shake a scepter at, leaving the treasury emptier than a vodka bottle at a boyar's banquet. This 24-year money pit drained resources faster than you can say, financial ruin, and left the Russian economy limping along like a three-legged horse. The Oprichnina, with its seizure of lands and subsequent mismanagement, only compounded the problem. It was the economic equivalent of trying to patch a sinking ship with confetti. Yet, amidst this fiscal chaos, Ivan did lay the groundwork for future economic development. His establishment of trade routes with England opened Russia to the wider world, planting the seeds for international commerce that would bloom in later centuries. These economic ties, albeit shaky, were a step towards integrating Russia into the European trade network, a crucial move for a nation that had often felt isolated on the fringes of the continent. Ivan's reforms also inadvertently set the stage for the rise of the autocratic state. By centralizing power and curbing the boyars, he paved the way for a stronger, more unified Russia. Sure, it was a unity forged in fear and paranoia, but it was unity nonetheless. His introduction of the Sudebnik and efforts to standardize the legal system, though fraught with complications, were pioneering attempts to bring order to the chaos of medieval governance. The irony. Ivan's quest for control ultimately left Russia with a more entrenched bureaucracy, a legacy as enduring as a Russian winter. But let's not sugarcoat it. Ivan's reign was also one of unprecedented terror. The Oprichnina, with its grim imagery of black-clad enforcers and public executions, was a masterclass in state-sponsored fear. It was Ivan's twisted solution to the paranoia that plagued him, a desperate attempt to root out treason with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer. The human cost was staggering. Thousands displaced, economies shattered, and entire families erased from history's pages. It's the kind of legacy that leaves a bitter aftertaste, a reminder that power wielded through fear is a double-edged sword. Ivan's personal life was equally tumultuous, a Shakespearean tragedy of love, loss, and betrayal. His 8 marriages were less about romance and more about political maneuvering, each one a strategic move on the chessboard of court politics. The death of his first wife, Anastasia, was perhaps the pivotal moment that tipped Ivan over the edge, fueling his descent into paranoia and fury. Her passing marked the loss of his anchor, leaving him adrift in a sea of suspicion and resentment. And yet, despite the darkness, Ivan's reign wasn't devoid of cultural progress. His patronage of the arts and the establishment of the Moscow print yard were significant strides in promoting literacy and culture. The introduction of the printing press was a game-changer, a beacon of enlightenment in an era often shrouded in ignorance. It's a testament to Ivan's complex legacy that he could be both a ruthless tyrant and a cultural benefactor, a man of contradictions who left an indelible mark on Russian history. So why does Ivan the Terrible continue to captivate us? Perhaps it's his larger-than-life persona, a blend of charisma and cruelty that makes for compelling storytelling. Ivan's tale is a cautionary one, a reminder of the perils of absolute power and the corrosive effects of paranoia. His reign mirrors modern political dramas, where leaders grapple with the same age-old questions of governance, loyalty, and legacy. In Ivan, we see the eternal struggle between ambition and morality, a dance as old as power itself. Ivan's story is also a reflection of the human condition, a narrative that delves into the depths of ambition, fear, and the search for legacy. It's a tale that resonates across the centuries, offering lessons about the nature of power and the consequences of wielding it unchecked. Ivan's legacy is a tapestry woven with both triumph and tragedy, a reminder that history is never black and white, but rather a complex mosaic of human experience. As we close the book on Ivan the Terrible, we're left with a portrait of a man whose life was as turbulent as the era he lived in. A ruler who, despite his many flaws and failures, sought to forge a path for his nation amidst the chaos and uncertainty of the medieval world. Ivan's story is a testament to the enduring allure of power and the eternal quest for legacy, a quest that, like Ivan himself, is as vast and enigmatic as the Russian landscape. In the end, Ivan the Terrible remains a figure of fascination, not because he was a perfect ruler, but because he was an imperfect one. His life was a study in contrasts, a reminder that history's greatest figures are often those who embody both the light and the darkness of their times. As we step back from the drama of Ivan's reign, we're left with a deeper understanding of the complexities of power, the fragility of human ambition, and the indelible impact one individual can have on the course of history. And perhaps in his story we find a reflection of our own, an eternal dance between the allure of power and the weight of its consequences. If you took a time machine back to 4500 BCE, you might find yourself smack dab in the middle of Mesopotamia, a historically underrated hotspot. Forget the glitzy lights of Vegas or the chaotic buzz of Tokyo. Ancient Mesopotamia was where the action was. Situated between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, this area was the equivalent of a neon sign flashing, "Welcome to the cradle of civilization." What it lacked in fast Wi-Fi and coffee shops, it more than made up for in fertile soil and ingenious human development. You see, those two rivers weren't just a mapmaker's dream. They were lifelines that transformed a chunk of the Middle East into an agricultural goldmine. The Sumerians, the folks who set up shop in this prime real estate, were the original urban planners. While they didn't have zoning laws or city councils obsessed with bike lanes, they did have a knack for building city-states that would make any modern mayor envious. But let's not romanticize their situation too much. The reality was they were basically squatting on land that just happened to be perfect for growing things. And that's where the magic of agriculture comes into play. Before the Sumerians started doing their thing, most humans were busy chasing animals or picking berries. Enter agriculture, the game-changer of the era. The Sumerians figured out that by planting seeds in the rich silt deposited by those two generous rivers, they could grow enough food to stick around in one place. This wasn't just about trading a nomadic lifestyle for a settled one. It was about ensuring survival and thriving in a way their ancestors probably couldn't even imagine. With agriculture, population booms followed like a sequel that actually lives up to the original. Suddenly, they weren't just surviving, they were thriving, and communities grew faster than a teenager's appetite. Now let's talk tech. Sure, they didn't invent the smartphone, but they did come up with something that arguably changed human history even more: the wheel. Picture the moment when someone thought, hey, what if we made these heavy things roll? It was revolutionary. Literally. With the wheel, the Sumerians could move goods and people with unprecedented ease. It didn't exactly make rush-hour traffic a breeze, but it sure made trade and transportation a whole lot more efficient. And when you're hauling grain or building material, that's nothing to sniff at. But wait, it gets better. Riding. Yep, the Sumerians also gifted us cuneiform, the earliest form of writing. Forget about emojis and text slang. This was the real deal. Originally used for administrative purposes, think ancient spreadsheets on clay tablets, writing became a cornerstone of Sumerian society. It allowed them to keep records, which meant they could manage resources better, plan ahead, and basically run a more organized society. Imagine trying to collect taxes or distribute food without writing anything down. It would be chaos, like trying to organize a music festival without a single note of communication. So there we have it, the dawn of urbanization in a nutshell. A fertile crescent, two rivers, agriculture, the wheel, and riding. These were the building blocks of the Sumerian city-states. They weren't just playing Sim City. They were laying the groundwork for what would eventually become full-fledged civilizations. The Sumerians might not have known it at the time, but they were setting the stage for everything that came after. Think of them as the opening act that didn't just warm up the crowd, but left a legacy that still echoes today. So, with the groundwork laid for a civilization to blossom, let's take a stroll through a Sumerian city-state. Imagine stepping into Uruk, one of the oldest cities on record, around 3000 BCE. While we might have modern skyscrapers today, back then, the towering structures were ziggurats. These massive step pyramids weren't just architectural show-offs. They were the nerve centers of Sumerian life, blending the divine and the mundane in a way that would make any city planner nod in approval. Here's the scoop. Ziggurats were more than just places for the guards to hang out. Sure, they were religious hubs where priests performed rituals and made offerings to deities like Anu and Inanna. But they also had an economic angle. Think of them as the ancient equivalent of a mixed-use development. The base level often housed workshops and storerooms, bustling with economic activity, from grain storage to textile production. And up top, that's where the sky met the earth, and the priestly class did their thing, keeping both guards and grain in balance. It's like having Wall Street, a factory, and a church all rolled into one. The Sumerian social order was a well-oiled machine, albeit with a touch of divine favoritism. At the top sat the priest kings, or ensi, who were believed to have a direct line to the gods. They were the original dual-purpose leaders, combining spiritual authority with political power. Below them, you had a strata that included priests, scribes, and bureaucrats who kept the bureaucratic gears turning. Yes, even in ancient times, someone had to deal with the pesky paperwork, though in their case, it was clay tablets. Then came the artisans and merchants. These folks were the backbone of the urban economy, crafting goods and trading them across the Mesopotamian region. If you were a skilled potter or a savvy merchant, your life was a mix of hard work and a touch of prosperity. The markets were the social media of the day, buzzing with the latest gossip and the best deals. And let's not forget the laborers, those who toiled in the fields and construction sites, making sure that the whole operation didn't fall apart. These were the unsung heroes of Sumeria, the ones who made sure the cities didn't crumble under their own weight. Life for the average Sumerian citizen wasn't exactly the stuff of epic poetry, despite what you might read on a clay tablet. It was gritty, filled with hard work and little room for upward mobility. But hey, at least they didn't have to deal with spam emails. Instead, their concerns were more tangible, keeping the irrigation canals clear, ensuring the crops didn't fail, and hoping the next harvest wouldn't be their last. You see, in a world where everything depended on the whims of the rivers and the favor of the gods, Life was a perpetual gamble. Contrary to popular myth, Sumerian cities weren't all about grand palaces and endless feasts. Sure, there were celebrations and religious festivals, but the everyday reality was much more grounded. Homes were made from mud bricks, a practical choice given the lack of stone and wood. Streets were narrow and winding, a far cry from the grid patterns of modern cities. And the sanitation, let's just say it left something to be desired. No flushing toilets or running water here, folks, just a communal system that was basic at best. Yet despite these limitations, there was an undeniable vibrancy to Sumerian life. The city-states were hubs of innovation and cultural exchange. It was here that the seeds of modern civilization were sown, with trade routes extending as far as the Indus Valley and the shores of the Mediterranean. The Sumerians were the original globalists, long before that became a buzzword. And let's not forget the entertainment. Sure, they didn't have Netflix, but they did have music, dance, and storytelling. The Epic of Gilgamesh, anyone. These tales weren't just stories. They were cultural touchstones that shaped Sumerian identity and echoed through the ages. In the end, the Sumerian city-states were a fascinating mix of the divine and the mundane, the grand and the gritty. They were places where innovation met tradition, where every day was a balancing act between survival and celebration. And while we might not envy their lack of modern conveniences, there's something to be said for their resilience and creativity in the face of a world that was often as harsh as it was beautiful. So, as we close today's chapter on Sumeria, remember that these ancient city-states were more than just dusty ruins. They were vibrant communities that laid the foundation for everything that followed. And like all good stories, there's always another chapter waiting to be told. Stay tuned, because the saga of Sumeria is far from over. As we leave behind the vibrant tapestry of Sumerian daily life, let's zoom out and take a look at the broader economic forces that turned these city-states into ancient powerhouses. Think of the Sumerian economy as the original global marketplace, long before anyone ever thought of a stock exchange or a global bank. We're talking about trade networks so expansive, they make your local farmer's market look like a lemonade stand. Picture this. By around 3000 BCE, Sumerian merchants were setting sail and trekking across lands to trade with regions as far-flung as the Indus Valley and the Mediterranean. You might think ancient trade was all about peaceful barter under the warm Mesopotamian sun. But hold your camels, because the reality was more Game of Thrones than Little House on the Prairie. These trading networks were cutthroat and competitive, resembling more of a Wild West showdown than a cozy swap meet. Take, for example, the trade routes stretching to the Indus Valley, which were no walk in the park. These were intense, high-stakes ventures. The Sumerians were after lapis lazuli, that striking blue stone that was the ancient equivalent of a luxury brand handbag, highly sought after and a serious status symbol. In return, they offered textiles and grain, the bread and butter, or should we say barley and wool of their economy. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Rival city-states and bandit groups added a layer of danger that would make even the most seasoned trader sweat. These trade routes weren't just about flashy goods, though. They facilitated the spread of ideas, technologies, and even riding systems, making the world a little smaller and a lot more interconnected. And speaking of riding, let's give a shout-out to cuneiform, the Sumerians' clay tablet brainchild. If you thought keeping track of your expenses was a hassle, imagine doing it on a piece of wet clay with a stylus. Yet this was the backbone of Sumerian commerce. Cuneiform allowed merchants to keep records of transactions, manage inventories, and essentially run their business operations with a semblance of order. It was the Excel spreadsheet of ancient Mesopotamia, minus the undo button. Now, let's tackle another myth, the idea that ancient trade was all hugs and handshakes. The reality, Sumerian commerce was a battleground. City-states like and Lagash were constantly vying for control over trade routes, resources, and influence. In fact, early records show that disputes over land and trade rights often escalated into full-blown conflicts. Imagine a heated debate over a trade agreement turning into a small war. Now that's what you call high-stakes negotiation. And then there was taxation, the great equalizer that's been a thorn in humanity's side since time immemorial. The Sumerians were no strangers to this concept. They pioneered the practice of levying taxes, not just to fill the NC's coffers, but to fund public works and religious temples. It's one thing to build a ziggurat, It's another to maintain it without a steady stream of revenue. So, taxes were collected in the form of grain, livestock, and labor, ensuring that the city-state could thrive while keeping its population's quality of life somewhat stable. But let's be real. Nobody loves a tax collector, whether they're dealing in barley or Benjamins. This system wasn't just about keeping the lights on. It was about stability and order in a world that could quickly tip into chaos. Imagine the chaos of trying to organize an ancient society without a structured system of revenue. You'd have more than just disgruntled citizens. You'd have a recipe for collapse. So, while the romanticized view of ancient trade as a harmonious exchange of goods is appealing, it's crucial to remember that Sumerian commerce was a complex, often brutal game of strategy, survival, and sometimes sheer luck. In this world of trade and taxes, the Sumerians were nothing if not resourceful. They turned their city-states into thriving centers of commerce and culture, setting the stage for future civilizations to build upon. And while they didn't have the benefit of modern conveniences, their ingenuity in navigating the choppy waters of ancient economics is nothing short of impressive. As we delve deeper into the saga of Sumeria, keep in mind that these ancient peoples were more than just the sum of their ziggurates and clay tablets. They were the architects of an economic system that, in many ways, laid the groundwork for the interconnected world we know today. So, next time you're scrolling through an online marketplace, spare a thought for the Sumerians who, thousands of years ago, were pioneering the art of trade in a world that was just beginning to discover its potential. Stay tuned, because there's more to uncover in this tale of ancient innovation and ambition. Speaking of ambition, let's shift gears to the political drama that unfolded in ancient Sumeria. Think of it as the original Game of Thrones, minus the dragons, but with plenty of intrigue and power plays. The Sumerian city-states were like a group of frenemies at a never-ending dinner party, constantly jostling for dominance while pretending to play nice. At the heart of this political landscape were the famous cities of Uruk, and Lagash, each vying for the title of top dog in Mesopotamia. Uruk, often hailed as the jewel in the Sumerian crown, wasn't just another dusty settlement along the Euphrates. It was a bustling metropolis, the New York City of its time, complete with towering ziggurates and a thriving economy. But this wasn't just about bricks and barley. Uruk's real claim to fame was its most legendary ruler, Gilgamesh. Ah, Gilgamesh. The name alone conjures images of epic quests and divine encounters. But before you get too carried away by the allure of myth, let's separate fact from fiction. The Epic of Gilgamesh, a literary masterpiece that predates Homer by a good millennium, paints our hero as part god, part man, and all ego. While the narrative is rich with adventure and philosophical musings, the real Gilgamesh was likely more concerned with administrative duties and infrastructure projects than battling mythical beasts. Historical records suggest he ruled around 2700 BCE, a time when being a king meant less about heroics and more about handling the gritty realities of governance. Now, speaking of governance, let's talk about the concept of divine kingship, a nifty little idea that essentially let rulers claim they had a direct line to the gods. It was like having a backstage pass to the divine concert, giving kings both authority and a convenient excuse for any questionable decisions. Why did I raise taxes? Because the gods told me to. Divine kingship was political genius, a way to consolidate power by wrapping it in a cloak of spirituality. It was also a social adhesive, helping to keep the ever-expanding city-states from flying apart at the seams. But divine kingship wasn't just about maintaining power, it was about projecting it. The Ensi, or priest kings, weren't just political figures. They were seen as earthly representatives of the divine, a role that came with both perks and pressures. You didn't just govern the city, you embodied its connection to the cosmos. The fate of the harvest, the success of trade, even the weather could be seen as reflections of a ruler's favor with the gods. Talk about a high-stakes job. Meanwhile, the city of was playing its own game of political chess. Known for its sophisticated bureaucracy, was the Sumerian equivalent of a Silicon Valley startup, innovating with early forms of law codes. Around 2100 BCE, Namu, one of its most notable rulers, laid down a legal framework that would make any modern lawyer proud. These laws were carved into tablets. Think of them as Stone Age terms of service agreements, and covered everything from property rights to personal injury claims. It was a pioneering attempt to bring order out of chaos, giving citizens a semblance of justice in a world where chaos was often just a flood or famine away. Speaking of floods, let's not forget Lagash, another key player in this ancient power struggle. Located near the confluence of the Tigris and Euphrates, Lagash was often at odds with its neighbors, particularly over water rights. You see, water was the lifeblood of Sumerian agriculture, and controlling it was akin to holding the keys to the kingdom. This wasn't just a squabble over puddles. It was a matter of survival and prosperity. The political landscape of Sumeria was littered with conflicts over these precious resources, sometimes escalating into full-blown warfare. It was like a high-stakes poker game where everyone's betting with someone else's grain. Amidst this turbulence, city-states were like chess pieces on a board constantly in flux. Alliances were as fragile as a clay tablet in a rainstorm, and betrayals were as common as sandstorms. Yet despite this political theater, there was a method to the madness. These rivalries pushed technological and cultural advancements as each city-state sought to outdo the others. In a twisted way, the competition was a catalyst for progress, leading to innovations in everything from writing to warfare. But let's not romanticize the chaos too much. The reality was harsh, and life under these rulers wasn't all feasts and festivals. The common folk bore the brunt of these political machinations, their lives shaped by decisions made in ziggurat chambers far removed from the muddy streets where they toiled. Stability was a luxury, not a guarantee, and the whims of kings, and their presumed divine mandates, could change the course of a city-state overnight. As we continue to peel back the layers of Sumerian history, it's clear that these ancient city-states, with their rivalries and reforms, weren't just footnotes in the grand narrative of civilization. They were vibrant, dynamic entities that laid the groundwork for the political systems we see today. So, the next time you're navigating the complexities of modern politics, spare a thought for the Sumerians who were doing it millennia ago, armed with nothing but clay tablets and a healthy dose of divine inspiration. Stay tuned, because the saga of Sumeria is far from over. There's more intrigue to unravel, more myths to debunk, and more truths to uncover as we delve deeper into this ancient world. The story continues, and trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. And as we continue this historical roller coaster, let's focus on what the Sumerians left behind, a legacy so profound that it echoes through time like the bass drop at a music festival. The Sumerians, with their penchant for invention and administration, didn't just disappear into the sands of Mesopotamia. They handed down a cultural baton that will be picked up by subsequent civilizations, shaping the ancient world and beyond. First off, let's talk about writing. The Sumerians' invention of cuneiform was as revolutionary as the internet, minus the cat memes. This script wasn't just scribbles on clay tablets. It was the dawn of recorded history. By 3000 BCE, they were documenting everything from grain inventories to epic poetry, effectively saying, "Hey, future generations, this is how it's done." Cuneiform spread like a viral TikTok challenge, influencing Akkadian, Babylonian, and even the Assyrian scripts. It was the original Rosetta Stone, a key to unlocking not just language, but the thoughts and dreams of an entire civilization. And then there's law. Around 2100 BCE, Ur-Nammu devised one of the earliest known law codes. These weren't just rules. They were civilizations, first attempts at social order. They dealt with everything from marriage and property rights to personal injury, a precursor to modern legal systems. Picture Judge Judy in a toga, presiding over disputes with a clay tablet instead of a gavel. This legal framework laid the groundwork for Hammurabi's more famous laws, proving that Sumerian influence was more than just a footnote in the annals of history. But let's not ignore the elephant, or perhaps the ziggurat, in the room. The Sumerian city-states weren't exactly paragons of stability. The very forces that propelled them to greatness, those fertile lands and ingenious innovations, would also contribute to their decline. Environmental challenges played a leading role in this ancient drama. You see, Mesopotamia's Fertile Crescent was like a double-edged sword. Sure, it was great for agriculture, but over time, intensive farming led to salinization of the soil. Picture your backyard garden slowly turning into the Great Salt Flats. Yields dropped, crops failed, and the Sumerian economy took a nosedive. And then there were the invasions. The Sumerians, for all their achievements, had neighbors who weren't exactly handing out friendship bracelets. Around 2000 BCE, the Amorites, a nomadic people from the north, swept into the region like a historical plot twist. They didn't just knock on the city gates. They barreled through, bringing with them new cultural influences and political upheaval. By the time the dust settled, the once dominant Sumerian city-states were shadows of their former glory, absorbed into new empires. Yet the Sumerians weren't completely erased. Their innovations were like seeds scattered to the winds, taking root in new soil. The Babylonians and Assyrians who followed didn't just conquer Sumerian lands. They absorbed and adapted their technologies and ideas. The wheel, riding, and law codes were too useful to discard, and so they lived on, evolving with each subsequent civilization. It was like the ultimate cultural remix, with Sumer as the original track. So, what's the takeaway from this ancient tale? The Sumerians were the architects of a world that was just beginning to understand its potential. They weren't just building city-states. They were laying the foundation for the complex societies that would follow. While the romantic notion of Sumeria as the idyllic cradle of civilization is tempting, the reality was a bit grittier. It was a world of mud-brick houses and unpredictable floods, of political intrigue and divine mandates. Yet, amidst this, they achieved remarkable feats that continue to shape our world. As we wrap up our journey through the land between the rivers, let's hold a moment of appreciation for these ancient innovators. They were the original dreamers, the first to look at a lump of clay and see a story. Their legacy is a reminder that even in the harshest environments, human ingenuity can flourish. So next time you fire up Google Docs or consult a legal contract, give a nod to the Sumerians. They were there, chiseling away at the bedrock of civilization, one clay tablet at a time. And that, my friends, is a legacy worth remembering. In the vast and chilly expanses of ancient Scandinavia, the Norse folks spun a cosmological web as intricate as their braids and twice as tough as their warriors. At the heart of it all was Yggdrasil, the cosmic tree holding the universe together. This wasn't your average oak or pine, mind you. Yggdrasil was the tree of life, a mighty ash reaching through time and space, with roots and branches dipping into different realms like a celestial buffet. Picture the universe as an epic, multi-tiered cake, with layers ranging from heavenly Asgard to the infernal depths of hell. Each realm had its own quirks and residents, from gods to giants, and let's not forget the dwarfs busy with their underground DIY projects. Now, let's talk about the Norse gods, starting with Odin, the one-eyed king of Asgard. Odin was the kind of guy who'd sacrifice his eye for wisdom, literally. He tossed it into Mimir's well for a sip of knowledge. Talk about commitment to self-improvement. With his two ravens, Hugin and Munin, flying around collecting gossip like celestial TMZ reporters, Odin was always in the know. But let's be honest, his parenting skills were a bit suspect. Take his son, Thor, for example. Thor had a hammer, Mjolnir, that he was never seen without. It was said to be so heavy only he could lift it, basically the Norse version of a security blanket. Thor spent his days smashing giants and creating thunder, a bit of a workaholic, really. But who can blame him? With a hammer that returns to your hand like a boomerang, wouldn't you be tempted to throw it at anything that moved? Odin's other son, Loki, was the original trickster, which means he'd be the guy at a party who'd spike the punch just to watch what happens. His escapades were legendary, often causing more chaos than a room full of toddlers with paint. Loki's antics kept things interesting in Asgard, but they also meant he was about as trusted as an email from a Nigerian prince. Yet, despite the chaos, Odin seemed to have a soft spot for him. Maybe he appreciated the unpredictability, or maybe he just knew that every family needs a black sheep, or in this case, a shape-shifting, sometimes horse-giving birth sheep. While the Norse gods were busy with their divine soap opera, the giants were lurking in Jotunheim, a realm as inhospitable as its residents were enormous. Giants in Norse mythology weren't just big, they were the embodiment of chaos and wild nature, constantly clashing with the gods. It's like having a rowdy neighbor who throws wild parties and steals your mail. This ongoing feud was a central theme in Norse stories, giving Thor plenty of reasons to show off his hammer skills. Meanwhile, beneath the roots of Yggdrasil, in the realm of Svartalfheim, the dwarfs were hard at work. These guys were the mad scientists and master craftsmen of the Norse world, forging legendary items like Thor's hammer and Odin's spear. If there was something magical and metal in Norse mythology, chances are a dwarf had a hand in it. They were like the Silicon Valley of the Viking Age, minus the avocado toast. But why would anyone want to live in a world where winter overstayed its welcome more than your in-laws during the holidays? The answer lies in the Norse love for epic stories and the belief in something beyond the mundane. Living in a land of ice and fire forged a people who were as hardy as their gods were dramatic. For the Norse, the harsh reality of their environment was intertwined with their myths, creating a worldview where every storm was a battle between gods, and every mountain held the echo of giant footsteps. That's the beauty of Norse cosmology. It's messy, chaotic, and filled with larger-than-life characters. From Odin's quest for knowledge at any cost to Thor's hammer obsession, these stories reflect the Norse understanding of the world. Unpredictable, unforgiving, but endlessly fascinating. So, next time you find yourself grumbling about the weather, remember the Norse saw it as a divine drama, with gods, giants, and dwarfs all playing their part. And in a world where the universe is a colossal tree, who wouldn't want to stick around for the next chapter? Now, if you thought the Norse cosmology was a saga worth binge-watching, just wait until you dip your toes into the daily religious practices of the Vikings. These folks had rituals as elaborate as a Viking braid and as essential as Mjolnir to Thor. Their spiritual life wasn't just about kneeling in some quiet corner. It was a full-throttle community affair, with enough drama to rival any soap opera. Let's kick things off with ship burials, the Viking way of sending off their honored dead. Forget a simple 6-foot hole in the ground. These funerals were the blockbuster events of the afterlife insurance policy. When a chieftain or someone of importance passed away, they'd be laid in a ship. Yes, an actual ship, surrounded by the spoils of their earthly life. We're talking weapons, jewelry, and even sacrificed animals. Sometimes, if you were really special, you might get a few human sacrifices to keep you company. Not exactly the kind of inheritance you want to leave behind, but hey, different strokes for different folks, right? The ship would then be set ablaze, either on land or set adrift in the water, creating a Viking spectacle that would make Hollywood special effects artists weep with envy. This wasn't just about pomp and circumstance, though. The Norse believed these grand send-offs ensured the deceased a smooth journey to Valhalla or whichever afterlife they were destined for. It was their version of a first-class ticket to eternity. And let's not forget the economic aspect. These burials were costly, a testament to the deceased's status and the community's wealth. It's like saying, we're so rich, we can afford to set a ship on fire. Now, onto the feasts. Because what's a religious ceremony without some serious noshing? Viking feasts were legendary, and not just because of the copious amounts of mead involved. These gatherings were less about solemn prayer and more about communal bonding, storytelling, and of course, drinking like there's no tomorrow. Mead, a honey-based alcoholic beverage, was the drink of choice, fueling the tales of gods and heroes as they flowed as freely as the drink itself. Picture a room full of Vikings, ale horns in hand, toasting to Odin while recounting tales of Thor's latest giant-squashing antics. It was like a Norse TED talk with more alcohol and fewer PowerPoint slides. But these feasts weren't just about getting merry. They were essential community events where political alliances were forged, disputes settled, and social hierarchies reinforced. You didn't just attend a feast, you navigated it, much like a modern networking event, but with more axes and less small talk. The economic implications were significant as well, with the cost of hosting a feast reflecting the host's status and generosity. You could say it was a Viking's way of showing off their wealth and influence without needing a flashy Instagram account. Speaking of showing off, let's talk about sacrifices. The Vikings took their offerings to the gods seriously, and these weren't just your run-of-the-mill fruit baskets. Sacrifices could range from animals like horses and pigs to, in some cases, humans. Before you get too horrified, remember that these sacrifices were seen as necessary to ensure the gods' favor. In a world where every storm could be Thor throwing a tantrum, keeping the gods on your good side was a matter of survival. It's the ancient equivalent of keeping your phone charged, essential for staying connected. Now, here's where things get particularly interesting. The role of women in these religious practices. Women weren't just passive participants. They were often at the helm as seeresses or sacrificial officiants. These women, known as vulvas, were respected for their spiritual insight and connection to the divine. They played a crucial role in ceremonies, guiding rituals, and interpreting the will of the gods. It's a fascinating reminder that in a society often seen as macho and male-dominated, women wielded significant spiritual power. The economic angle of sacrifices is worth noting, too. Offering up livestock or even human lives wasn't just a spiritual act. It was a statement of wealth and power. The ability to sacrifice valuable resources showed that you had enough to spare, a sign of prosperity in a world where scarcity was common. In a way, it was the ultimate flex, like driving a luxury car today, but with more blood and less carbon emissions. So there you have it. Viking religious practices were as multifaceted as a Norse saga, blending community, economy, and spirituality into a tapestry as rich as their mythology. Ship burials, feasts, and sacrifices were more than just rituals. They were the social glue that held Viking society together, ensuring that even in death, you didn't miss out on the action. And as we delve deeper into this world, remember that for the Vikings, the line between the divine and the mundane was as thin as the ice on a Scandinavian fjord. Stick around, because there's plenty more Norse wisdom to unravel as we sail further into their storied past. And speaking of unraveling tales, let's dive straight into the political tapestry of Norse mythology, where gods, legends, and power plays all wove together in a saga that would make Machiavelli proud. You see, the Norse chieftains weren't just rugged dudes with a penchant for helmets and longboats. They were also savvy political operators who used mythology as deftly as a Viking used a battle axe. First things first, the chieftains. These were the movers and shakers of Viking society, the local power brokers who held sway over their communities. And they didn't just rely on muscle and might to keep the peace. No, these leaders were masters of mythological manipulation, wielding religious beliefs like a sorcerer's staff. By claiming divine favor or direct lineage from the gods, chieftains could legitimize their rule and keep their subjects in line. It was like having a celestial endorsement. Imagine if your local mayor could claim Odin was their personal buddy and occasional drinking partner. One prime example of this power play was the legendary Harald Fairhair, the first king of Norway. Harald didn't just unite Norway through sheer force. He bolstered his claim with myth. The sagas tell us that he vowed not to cut his hair until he ruled all of Norway, a promise that was as much about public relations as personal grooming. With each battle won and territory claimed, his uncut locks became a living symbol of divine support and inevitable destiny. Talk about a hair-raising campaign strategy. But it wasn't just about personal branding. Norse myths also served as social glue, binding communities with shared stories and values. By invoking the gods, chieftains could rally their people around a common cause, whether it was raiding a neighboring village or defending against invaders. It was the ancient equivalent of a campaign slogan with a divine twist. The gods weren't just distant cosmic celebrities. They were active participants in the political arena, their tales reinforcing the social order. And then there were the runes. Runes, the ancient Norse script that was as enigmatic as it was powerful. Before we had Twitter, the Vikings had runic inscriptions, their own form of stone-bound social media. Transitioning from oral tradition to written words, the Norse used runes to record everything from mundane transactions to epic tales of gods and heroes. These inscriptions were carved into stone, wood, or metal, making them as permanent as a Viking's love for Mead. The shift from oral storytelling to runic inscriptions was a game-changer. It allowed the Norse to preserve their myths and laws in a tangible form, giving them a sense of permanence and authority. Think of it as the Norse equivalent of getting your story published in the New York Times instead of just telling it over dinner. Suddenly, chieftains and kings could literally set their stories in stone, ensuring their legacy and political narratives would endure long after they were gone. But, of course, with great power comes great potential for spin. Just like politicians today might tweak the facts to suit their narrative, Norse leaders could use runes to shape public perception. A stone inscription proclaiming a chieftain's victory wasn't just a record. It was propaganda, a way to cement their status and influence. It's like the original version of a press release, but with more chiseling involved. Economic factors also played a role in this interplay of myth and power. Supporting a chieftain wasn't just about loyalty. It was an economic decision. Successful leaders could offer protection, trade opportunities, and even religious festivals that boosted local economies. Supporting the right leader could mean the difference between prosperity and hardship, making the divine endorsement of a chieftain not just a spiritual matter, but a practical one. Now, let's not forget the allure of the myths themselves. These stories weren't just political tools. They were also captivating tales that inspired loyalty and devotion. The Norse gods were larger-than-life characters with relatable flaws and epic adventures, providing a model for human behavior and societal norms. By aligning themselves with these divine figures, chieftains tapped into a potent mix of fear, respect, and admiration. It was a delicate dance of power, belief, and storytelling, a saga as intricate as a Viking knot. The beauty of Norse mythology lies in its dual nature, both a source of spiritual guidance and a tool for political maneuvering. Chieftains didn't just rule through force, they ruled through faith, using myths to knit their communities together with a thread of divine destiny. It's a testament to the power of storytelling, an age-old truth that still resonates today. After all, whether in ancient Scandinavia or the modern world, the right story can move mountains, or in this case, entire communities. And as we continue to explore the Norse world, keep an eye out for more tales of gods, giants, and the humans who dared to harness their power. Because in the end, the interplay between myth and reality is a saga that never truly ends, echoing through the ages like a Viking war cry. So grab your horn of Mead and settle in, because the next chapter of Norse history is just waiting to be told. As the Norse myths echoed through their fjords and forests, a new player was quietly sneaking onto the stage, draped in robes and clutching a cross. Enter Christianity, the monotheistic rock star of the medieval world, ready to shake up the Viking cosmos like a Norse god at a wedding feast. The Christianization of the Norse wasn't a sudden lightning bolt conversion, but more like a slow, strategic game of chess, where bishops and priests moved across Scandinavia like well-dressed pawns. And believe me, this wasn't just a spiritual awakening. It was a full-scale cultural clash with a side of economic incentives. Let's set the scene. By the late 8th century, the Christian faith had already secured a pretty solid fan base across Europe. Meanwhile, our Norse friends were still busy raiding, trading, and myth-making. But as the Vikings started venturing beyond their icy backyard, they encountered Christian lands with enticing trade prospects. Suddenly, conversion wasn't just about saving souls. It was a savvy business decision. It's like the moment when you realize that learning Mandarin might help your import-export business with China. The pragmatic Norse were quick to see the benefits of swapping gods for goods. Take King Harold Bluetooth, for example, not just a king, but a trendsetter in the art of diplomatic conversion. Around 960 AD, Harold declared himself a Christian, marking a political watershed moment. This wasn't purely about a personal epiphany. Harold had his eyes on the bigger prize. By embracing Christianity, he could forge stronger alliances with powerful Christian neighbors like the Holy Roman Empire, gaining access to their trade networks and military support. The baptismal font was less about spiritual cleansing and more about washing away political isolation. Now, you might be thinking, wasn't this a huge betrayal of Norse traditions? Well, yes and no. The Norse were nothing if not adaptable. They had long incorporated new ideas into their belief system, and Christianity was just another addition to their cultural toolkit. Instead of a brutal eradication of the old ways, what emerged was a fascinating blend of traditions. Imagine a Norse wedding where Thor and Christ both got a shout-out in the vows. This synthesis was less about doctrinal purity and more about keeping everybody happy. And let's face it, nobody wants to upset Thor. The conversion process was more carrot than stick. Missionaries like Ansgar, the so-called Apostle of the North, trudged through the Scandinavian cold, offering the Norse not just salvation, but a slice of the prosperous Christian world. And while some Vikings were genuinely intrigued by promises of eternal life, many were more interested in the earthly benefits, improved trade terms, political alliances, and let's not forget, fewer Christian nations wanting to bash their skulls in. It was like joining an exclusive club where the membership perks included fewer holy wars against you. But hey, let's not sugarcoat it. Cultural clashes abounded. The Norse were used to a pantheon of gods who were as flawed and fiery as they were, while Christianity offered a single, all-powerful deity with a penchant for turning the other cheek. Try telling a Viking raider to forgive his enemies, and you might find yourself on the wrong end of an axe. Yet over time, the appeal of a loving god who promised eternal life began to win hearts and minds. The Norse gods, after all, offered more Valhalla than heaven, where the afterlife involved endless battles and feasting. Fun, sure, but not exactly a peaceful eternity. The shift wasn't just spiritual, it had profound societal implications. Norse art and literature began to reflect this blend of beliefs, with runestones and carvings depicting scenes where Christ and Odin seemed to share a stage. Economically, the conversion opened new channels for trade and communication as the Norse plugged into the vast Christian network that spanned Europe and beyond. Even the legal system saw a revamp, with Christian laws and morals slowly taking root, often mediated by the local chieftain-turned-Christian leader. It was the Middle Ages' answer to a corporate merger, with all the awkward blending that involves. Yet, the transition wasn't without resistance. Many Norse clung to their pagan roots, seeing the new religion as a foreign imposition. But as generations passed, the Christian faith took hold, aided by the establishment of churches and the introduction of tithes. A tenth of one's earnings paid to the church, which was less about spiritual generosity and more about a new economic obligation. Some chieftains, ever the opportunists, used this to their advantage, aligning themselves with the church to bolster their power and influence, effectively becoming the medieval equivalent of a CEO with a divine board of directors. One might wonder what happened to the Norse gods in this new world order. Did they just pack up and leave for a nice vacation in Iceland? Not quite. They lingered in the cultural memory, their stories and images woven into the fabric of Scandinavian identity. Even today, the legacy of the Norse gods endures, from the days of the week, Wednesday and Thursday, named for Odin and Thor, to the epic tales that still capture our imagination. It's a testament to the resilience of myth and the human penchant for keeping one foot in the past while stepping into the future. In the end, the Christianization of the Norse wasn't just a religious transformation. It was a cultural evolution, a testament to the adaptability and pragmatism of a people who knew how to navigate the shifting tides of politics and belief. And as we sail further into this saga, remember, the Norse gods might have taken a backseat, but their stories and spirit remain, echoing through history like the distant roar of Thor's thunder. Stay tuned, because this Viking voyage is far from over, and there's plenty more to uncover in the next chapter. And as the echoes of Thor's thunder fade into the Scandinavian mists, we find ourselves facing the 21st century, where Norse mythology has undergone a bit of a makeover, courtesy of pop culture's relentless recycling machine. Who knew that Odin and the gang would be resurrected in the form of comic book heroes and heavy metal anthems? It's a wild ride from ancient fjords to the big screen, where the gods have swapped their runes for capes and Mjolnir for a CGI makeover. Let's start with the most conspicuous of these modern resurrections, Marvel's Thor. First appearing in 1962, this hammer-wielding hero brought Norse mythology into living rooms across the globe, albeit with a few creative liberties. Forget the historical Thor with his thirst for Mead and penchant for giant slaying. Marvel's version is a clean-shaven, muscle-bound deity who looks like he stepped off a Nordic catwalk. But hey, who cares about historical accuracy when you have Chris Hemsworth's biceps to distract you? Marvel's take on the Norse gods has been a smash hit, sparking interest in the myths that inspired them. The comics and subsequent movies have introduced millions to the Norse pantheon, albeit with less blood and more banter. But while Marvel's gods are more likely to exchange quips than blows, the essence of their stories resonates with audiences. The allure of divine family drama and epic battles remains as potent as ever, proving that while the horned helmets might be a fiction, the appeal of these myths is anything but. Speaking of horned helmets, let's settle this once and for all. Vikings didn't wear them. The image of a Viking with horns sprouting from his headgear is about as historically accurate as a medieval knight wielding a lightsaber. The myth likely stems from 19th century Romanticism, a time when Vikings were reimagined as noble savages rather than pragmatic raiders. Those elaborate helmets, fit for an opera house, bear no resemblance to the utilitarian headgear actually worn by Norse warriors. Real Viking helmets were more about function than fashion, designed to protect rather than impress. Despite the myth-busting, horned helmets have cemented themselves in popular culture. From Halloween costumes to sports team mascots, the image persists, a testament to its enduring appeal. It's a romantic notion, conjuring images of fierce warriors and untamed lands, and while it might not be true, it's undeniably iconic. The reality was grittier, with Vikings more likely to be found farming or trading than plundering foreign shores. But where's the fun in that? Now, let's crank up the volume and dive into the world of Viking metal. This niche music genre channels the raw energy of Norse mythology into thunderous riffs and epic anthems. Bands like Amon Amarth and Enslaved draw heavily on Viking themes, crafting songs that echo with the same intensity as a Norse saga. It's the perfect soundtrack for anyone who's ever wished they could ride into battle alongside Odin, minus the risk of actually losing a limb. Viking metal isn't just about headbanging. It's a cultural phenomenon that speaks to the enduring legacy of Norse myths. By blending ancient stories with modern music, these bands create a bridge between past and present, allowing listeners to connect with their ancestral roots in a visceral way. It's a reminder that while the gods may have retreated from the world stage, their stories continue to inspire and resonate. But why do these ancient myths still captivate us? Perhaps it's because they offer a window into a world so different from our own, yet strikingly similar in its exploration of human nature. The Norse gods were flawed, their stories filled with betrayal, ambition, and the occasional bout of drunken revelry. They grappled with the same issues we do: power struggles, familial tensions, and the inevitability of fate. In a way, the Norse pantheon is a mirror, reflecting our own struggles and triumphs. This brings us to the heart of the Norse legacy: identity. In a world that often feels fragmented, the stories of Odin, Thor, and Loki offer a sense of continuity and cultural belonging. For Scandinavians, these myths are a vital part of their heritage, a link to a time when their ancestors roamed the seas and carved their tales into stone. But you don't have to hail from Norway or Sweden to appreciate their allure. The universal themes of heroism, sacrifice, and redemption transcend borders, resonating with anyone who's ever faced a challenge or fought for a cause. In the end, the legacy of Norse mythology is a testament to the power of storytelling. These ancient tales have survived not just because they're entertaining, but because they speak to something fundamental in the human experience. They remind us that while times change, the essence of who we are remains remarkably constant. We may no longer believe in gods who ride chariots across the sky or engage in epic battles with giants, but the stories they left behind continue to shape our worldviews and inspire our imaginations. So, as we wrap up our journey through the icy realms of Norse mythology, take a moment to reflect on the enduring power of these stories. From ancient sagas to modern blockbusters, the myths of the Norse have left an indelible mark on our culture. They've taught us about bravery, resilience, and the importance of a good story. And they've shown us that while the gods may have retreated into the mists of time, their legacy is very much alive, echoing through history like a distant roll of thunder. As you drift off to sleep, under the watchful gaze of the one-eyed Odin or the mischievous Loki, remember that the world is full of myths waiting to be uncovered. Whether you're battling your own giants or forging your destiny, these tales remind us that the journey is as important as the destination. So grab your metaphorical sword, channel your inner Viking, and set sail on your own epic adventure. After all, in a universe as vast as Yggdrasil, who knows what stories still await? In the grand tapestry of history, Charlemagne's early years were more like a Monty Python sketch than a Shakespearean drama. Born around 742 AD, give or take, into the Carolingian dynasty, a family that made Game of Thrones look like a cozy sitcom, young Charles was thrust into a world where inheritance was less about family love and more about strategy and survival. His father, Pepin the Short, was not exactly short on ambition, although he was indeed short. Standing at around 5 feet tall, Pepin was a powerhouse of ambition, crowned King of the Franks in 751, a title he grabbed with both hands from the Merovingians, who were the original long-haired hippies of the Frankish realm. Now, the Carolingians were all about keeping it in the family, but not in the way you might think. Their approach to inheritance was like a medieval version of musical chairs. Pepin had this bright idea to split his kingdom between his 2 sons, Charles and Carloman. a decision that screams what could possibly go wrong. In 768, when Pepin kicked the bucket, the kingdom was divided, with Charles getting the northern chunk and Charlemagne the southern piece. This wasn't exactly a recipe for sibling bonding. It was more like setting up a medieval soap opera, complete with suspicion, jealousy, and the occasional passive-aggressive letter. Charles and Charlemagne were not what you would call besties. They were more like rival CEOs of competing startups, both trying to outmaneuver each other in a realm that stretched from the Pyrenees to the Rhine. Imagine family dinners. They probably required a referee more than a butler. The tension was palpable, and alliances were as fickle as the Frankish weather. Charlemagne, or Charles, as he was known before he got his fancy title, was the kind of guy who had ambition tattooed on his soul. He was charismatic, cunning, and had a knack for seeing the bigger picture, qualities that make for a great leader but a challenging brother. Charlemagne, on the other hand, was more reserved, perhaps a bit embittered by the fact that his older brother got first dibs on the family legacy. The brothers' relationship was a medieval tug-of-war, with nobles and clergy often caught in the middle, not knowing whether to hedge their bets on Charles, the rising star, or Charlemagne, the sulking powerhouse. It was a tension that could only end in two ways, reconciliation or catastrophe. But let's not forget the elephant in the room, inheritance strategies of the Carolingians. You see, splitting kingdoms among siblings was a common practice in medieval Europe, a bit like handing out participation trophies at a school sports day. The idea was to prevent one person from becoming too powerful while keeping the family name in shiny lights. It worked about as well as you might expect. The plan was to maintain balance, but in reality, it often led to more division and conflict. It was like trying to keep a cake from collapsing by slicing it into 100 pieces. Back to our story. The twist of fate that sealed Charlemagne's rise to power came on December 4, 771, when Charlemagne unexpectedly died at the ripe old age of 20. It was a plot twist worthy of any soap opera, and it left Charles holding the entire Frankish kingdom in his hands. There was no dramatic showdown, no epic battle for supremacy, just the sudden, quiet exit of a rival. History doesn't record the cause of Charlemagne's death, leading to whispers of intrigue and foul play, though it was likely a mundane medieval ailment that did him in. But let's be real, nothing spices up a story like a hint of conspiracy. With Charlemagne out of the picture, Charlemagne seized the opportunity with the enthusiasm of a kid in a candy store. He didn't just sit back and mourn. He moved swiftly, consolidating power and ensuring the nobles who might have supported Charlemagne's heirs were now firmly on his side. Charles had the political acumen of a chess master, ensuring that his nephew, Charlemagne's young son, was quietly shuffled off to a monastery, far away from any throne-related temptations. Charlemagne's early years were a whirlwind of ambition, strategy, and a dash of familial tension. It's important to remember that he wasn't born with a crown on his head. He earned it through a mix of luck, wit, and a smattering of medieval misfortune. His rise to power wasn't just the result of his brother's untimely death, but a testament to his ability to navigate the treacherous waters of Frankish politics, a sea full of sharks in chainmail. As Charlemagne took the reins of a united kingdom, he embarked on a journey that would see him become one of the most formidable rulers of the medieval world. But that, dear friends, is a story for another night. For now, let's appreciate the early years of Charlemagne, a tale of sibling rivalry with a medieval twist, where the stakes were high, and the players were as unpredictable as the times they lived in. Charlemagne's rise to power wasn't just a prelude to a crown. It was the opening act to an epic saga of medieval expansion, where the plot twists were as wild as a Viking raider on a caffeine binge. With Charlemagne out of the picture, Charlemagne set his sights beyond the Frankish borders, eyeing territories like a kid at a candy store with a limitless allowance. But spoiler alert, his military campaigns weren't all sunshine and victory parades. While history paints him as an invincible warrior, reality is a little more, let's say, textured. Let's talk about the Saxons, Charlemagne's perennial thorn in the side. These folks were the medieval equivalent of that one neighbor who refuses to cut their lawn. They just wouldn't conform. Charlemagne spent over 30 years trying to subdue them, a campaign as protracted and frustrating as trying to assemble IKEA furniture without the instructions. The Saxons were resilient, and their homeland, stretching from the Elbe to the Rhine, was a logistical nightmare. Imagine trying to supply an army across that terrain with medieval technology. It's like herding cats with a broken GPS. Charlemagne's approach to the Saxon problem was a mix of brute force and strategic cajoling, with a heavy emphasis on the former. He launched at least 18 campaigns against them, a number that would make even the most hardened general wince. Despite his relentless efforts, the Saxons were like medieval Energizer bunnies. They just kept going. Every time Charlemagne thought he had them cornered, they'd pop up somewhere else, causing more headaches than a medieval hangover. But military genius isn't just about winning battles. It's also about learning from your mistakes. And boy, were their mistakes. Charlemagne's blunder at the infamous Battle of Roncesvalles Pass in 778 is a prime example. This was supposed to be a straightforward return journey from a campaign in Spain, but it turned into a medieval disaster movie. Ambushed by Basque forces, Charlemagne's rearguard was annihilated, including his trusted commander Roland. The battle was immortalized in the epic poem, The Song of Roland. But let's face it was more a cautionary tale than a heroic ballad. The economic weight of Charlemagne's campaigns was another elephant in the room, or rather, entire menagerie. Maintaining an empire wasn't just about swinging swords and chanting war cries. It was also about cold, hard cash. Armies needed feeding, equipment, and transportation. The Frankish economy relied heavily on agriculture, and mobilizing troops meant pulling labor away from the fields. Every campaign was a balancing act between military ambition and economic sustainability, kind of like juggling flaming torches while riding a unicycle. Charlemagne's solution. He wasn't content with just taxing his subjects into oblivion. Instead, he initiated a series of reforms to streamline his empire's bureaucracy, aiming to make the Frankish administration as efficient as possible, or at least less of a medieval mess. But let's not romanticize it. Medieval bureaucracy was about as organized as a sock drawer after laundry day. Officials were often more concerned with lining their own pockets than serving the empire. Corruption was rampant, and enforcing laws across such a vast territory was like trying to catch water in a sieve. And then there was the issue of logistics, a word that probably made Charlemagne break into a sweat. Moving an army across Europe was no small feat. Roads were often little more than dirt tracks, and rivers could be both lifelines and obstacles. Communication was another headache. Messages sent by horseback could take weeks to arrive, by which point the situation on the ground could have changed entirely. It's a wonder Charlemagne didn't have a medieval meltdown with all these factors conspiring against him. Yet, despite these challenges, Charlemagne's military campaigns left a lasting legacy. They expanded the Frankish realm to unprecedented size, laying the groundwork for what would become the Holy Roman Empire. However, it wasn't just about land and glory. Charlemagne had a vision, a united Europe under Christian rule, and he pursued it with the zeal of a man on a divine mission. His campaigns were as much about spreading Christianity as they were about conquest. He believed that by converting the Saxons and others, he wasn't just expanding his empire, he was doing God's work. But let's not kid ourselves. The romantic notion of a divine mission often glossed over the less savory aspects of these campaigns. Forced conversions were common, and those who resisted faced harsh punishments. The infamous massacre of Verdun in 782, where Charlemagne reportedly ordered the execution of 500 Saxons, is a stark reminder that his methods weren't always benevolent. It's the kind of historical footnote that makes you question the whole great Unifier narrative. Charlemagne's military legacy is a complex tapestry woven with threads of ambition, faith, and the harsh realities of medieval warfare. He was a man driven by a vision, but one whose path was littered with setbacks and sacrifices. His campaigns were legendary not because they were flawless, but because they were human, full of triumphs and blunders, strategic brilliance, and logistical chaos. As we delve deeper into Charlemagne's story, it's essential to remember that history is rarely black and white. It's a kaleidoscope of colors, each shade revealing a new perspective on a man who dared to dream big in a world that was constantly trying to cut him down to size. So, as we continue to explore the life and times of Charlemagne, let's keep our eyes open to the nuances and contradictions that make his story so compelling. There's more to come, and trust me, it only gets more intriguing from here. Stay tuned, because we're just getting started on this medieval roller coaster ride. As Charlemagne's military campaigns wrapped up, leaving a patchwork quilt of conquered lands and converted souls, he turned his formidable focus to something a bit more cerebral, the Carolingian Renaissance. Now, before you start picturing toga-wearing scholars lounging around discussing Plato over a goblet of mead, let's dig into what this so-called Renaissance really entailed. It wasn't a rebirth in the lavish, Michelangelo sense, but more of a medieval glow-up, where the dimly lit halls of knowledge got a few fresh candles. At the heart of this intellectual revival was Alcuin of York, a scholar with more brains than brawn, who brought the intellectual firepower of Anglo-Saxon England to the Frankish court. Imagine Alcuin as the medieval equivalent of a rock star professor, whose syllabus included everything from grammar to astronomy. Charlemagne, despite his warrior king image, was savvy enough to know that a kingdom wasn't built on battle axes alone. So, he invited Alcuin to his court around 781 AD, effectively making him the headmaster of Frankish enlightenment. Now, Alcuin wasn't just there to teach Charlemagne's kids how to conjugate Latin verbs. He was tasked with overhauling the entire educational system, a challenge akin to untangling a medieval ball of yarn. For starters, education in the Carolingian world was about as organized as a toddler's art project. It was a mishmash of oral tradition, local dialects, and religious instruction that left little room for consistency or critical thought. Alcuin's job was to whip this chaotic curriculum into shape, transforming it into something that resembled a coherent system. But let's be real, the idea of standardized education in the 8th century was as revolutionary as it was laughable. Picture trying to implement a curriculum across an empire where even the concept of a school was as foreign as a Frankish noble in a Roman toga. Alcuin and his team introduced the trivium and quadrivium, a fancy way of saying basic grammar, rhetoric, logic, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. It was an ambitious curriculum, a medieval attempt at creating well-rounded individuals, or at least ones who could read their own decrees. Charlemagne's court became a beacon of learning, attracting scholars from all over Europe like medieval moths to a cultural flame. The court at Aachen buzzed with intellectual exchange, and manuscripts were copied with a fervor that would rival a modern-day print-on-demand service. These weren't just any manuscripts, mind you. They were vital texts from classical antiquity that scholars like Alcuin deemed too important to lose to the sands of time. In fact, if you've ever enjoyed a bit of Virgil or pondered the wisdom of Aristotle, you might owe a nod to these medieval scribes for keeping those works alive. But let's not get too carried away with the romance of the scholarly king. Charlemagne himself, while undoubtedly a patron of the arts, was no Einstein. He reportedly struggled to write his own name, a task he took up later in life with more diligence than success. It said he kept a slate under his pillow so he could practice his letters, an image that softens the myth of the all-knowing monarch into something a bit more human, a bit more relatable. After all, even kings struggle with cursive. Despite his own educational limitations, Charlemagne understood the power of knowledge. He saw it as a tool for unification, a way to standardize not just the language of his empire, but also its laws and customs. The creation of a common script, the Carolingian minuscule, was one such attempt to streamline communication across his sprawling domain. This script, with its clear, legible letters, was the medieval answer to a typewriter, making it easier for decrees to be read and understood from Aachen to Aquitaine. The Carolingian Renaissance wasn't just about dusty old books and scholarly debates. It had practical implications, too. Charlemagne's reforms laid the groundwork for a more cohesive administration. Monasteries became centers of learning and education, training future monks and scribes who could manage the empire's bureaucratic needs. These changes were as much about governance as they were about enlightenment, a reminder that knowledge was a currency Charlemagne spent as wisely as gold. Yet, the path to intellectual greatness was far from smooth. Charlemagne's attempts to unify his empire through education faced obstacles akin to herding cats in a blizzard. Local dialects, resistant clergy, and a general lack of resources made the implementation of a standardized system a Herculean task. It's easy to romanticize the era as a time of great learning, but the reality was a bit grittier, a bit more like trying to build a library out of sandcastles. Moreover, the romanticized image of Charlemagne as a scholarly king glosses over the practical challenges he faced. For one, the Frankish economy wasn't exactly rolling in dough. Charlemagne's military campaigns, while expanding his borders, were a financial burden. Keeping an army fed and equipped while funding educational reforms was like spinning plates on a windy day. The Carolingian economy was predominantly agrarian, and any shift in focus, like an extended military campaign or a bad harvest, could spell disaster. And let's talk about the clergy, the empire's unofficial gatekeepers of knowledge. While many were enthusiastic supporters of Charlemagne's reforms, others viewed this intellectual revival with suspicion. After all, knowledge is power, and not everyone was keen on sharing it. Charlemagne had to navigate these ecclesiastical politics with the finesse of a tightrope walker, ensuring that his reforms didn't upset the delicate balance between church and state. Despite these obstacles, the Carolingian Renaissance left an indelible mark on European culture. It planted seeds of knowledge that would eventually blossom into the more famous Renaissance centuries later. Charlemagne's vision of a unified, educated empire may have been ambitious, but it was also visionary, laying the intellectual groundwork for a continent that, at the time, was still finding its way out of the Dark Ages. In the grand scheme of history, Charlemagne's court was less about creating a utopia of scholars, and more about forging a path forward in a world that was often more chaotic than cohesive. It was a time of transition, where the old ways of doing things were challenged by new ideas and innovations. The Carolingian Renaissance was not just an era of intellectual revival, but a testament to the power of education as a tool for change, even in the hands of a king more at home on the battlefield than in the library. So, as we continue our journey through Charlemagne's reign, let's remember that no king rules alone. The scholars, scribes, and monks of his court played as crucial a role in shaping the empire as his generals and warriors. Together, they forged a legacy that would echo through the ages, a legacy of learning, leadership, and the relentless pursuit of a dream that was as grand as it was fraught with challenges. Stay tuned, because the story of Charlemagne is far from over. There's much more to uncover, and trust me, it only gets more fascinating from here. As we plunge into the next chapter of Charlemagne's saga, we find ourselves at the intersection of faith and power. A king's crown may glitter, but in medieval Europe, it was the church's blessing that cast the real shine. Charlemagne, ever the strategic visionary, understood that if he wanted to consolidate his empire, he needed more than just military might and scholarly reforms. He needed divine approval, or at least the appearance of it. Enter Pope Leo Roman III, who found himself in a bit of a political pickle in Rome. It was the year 799, and Leo was having a rough time. Imagine being the spiritual leader of Christendom, yet facing more political drama than a reality TV star. Leo's enemies, not content with just whisper campaigns, escalated matters to a full-blown assault, attempting to blind and depose him. Talk about a hostile work environment. Leo managed to escape, seeking refuge with Charlemagne in Paderborn, a move that would set the stage for one of the most significant partnerships in medieval history. Charlemagne, ever the opportunist, saw the potential in Leo's plight. Here was a chance to bind the spiritual authority of the papacy with his own burgeoning secular power. But let's not paint this as an act of pure altruism. Charlemagne was as much about political chess as he was about Christian charity. By supporting Leo, he could reinforce his own legitimacy, further unifying his empire under the twin banners of cross and crown. Fast forward to Christmas Day, 800 AD. Picture this: the Grand Basilica of St. Peter's, filled with the who's who of the medieval world, as Charlemagne knelt in prayer. Whether genuinely pious or strategically posed is up for debate. Pope Leo Roman III placed a crown on his head, declaring him Emperor of the Romans. It was a move that shocked Charlemagne, or so the story goes. But let's be honest, this kind of surprise is like pretending to be caught off guard when your friends throw you a birthday party you planned yourself. This imperial coronation was a masterclass in medieval PR. Charlemagne was now not just king of the Franks and Lombards, but an emperor with a title that harked back to the glory days of Rome. The symbolism was potent, the revival of the Western Roman Empire under a Christian ruler. Never mind that the actual Roman Empire was still alive and kicking in the East. Details, details. The coronation was also a deft political maneuver by Leo Roman III, who effectively tied the legitimacy of the Holy Roman Empire to the papacy. By crowning Charlemagne, Leo underscored the church's role as kingmaker, a position that would grow in significance and contention over the following centuries. It was a union of convenience, power, and faith, with each party eyeing the other like two cats sharing a particularly comfortable patch of sunlight. But let's not get too carried away with the romance of divine rights and imperial grandeur. There were practical implications, too. Charlemagne's new title came with expectations, chief among them the defense and expansion of Christendom. This wasn't just a ceremonial role, it was a call to action. The Christianization of Europe wasn't a gentle nudge towards enlightenment. It was, at times, an aggressive push, with Charlemagne wielding both sword and scripture. Take the Saxons, for instance. Charlemagne's efforts to convert them were as much about cementing his rule as saving their souls. His methods were, shall we say, less than subtle. After years of resistance, the Saxons faced an ultimatum: baptism or death. The infamous massacre of Verdun in 782 is a testament to the brutal reality behind the missionary zeal. Charlemagne ordered the execution of thousands of pagan Saxons, a dark chapter that casts a long shadow over his legacy. Yet, for all the bloodshed, Charlemagne's policies did lay the groundwork for a more unified Christian Europe. His establishment of bishoprics and monasteries across his empire served dual purposes, spreading the faith and reinforcing his rule. These ecclesiastical outposts became centers of power and education, extending Charlemagne's influence into the spiritual realm. Economic realities also played a role in Charlemagne's religious strategy. By allying with the church, he could tap into its vast resources. Tithes, land grants, and the labor of monks and peasants flowed into the empire's coffers, funding everything from military campaigns to educational reforms. It was a symbiotic relationship, with the church providing the spiritual legitimacy that Charlemagne needed to hold his diverse empire together. But the alliance was not without its friction. Question of who held ultimate authority, emperor or pope, was a thorny issue that would grow into a full-blown crisis in later centuries. Charlemagne and Leo Roman III might have been able to put aside their differences for mutual benefit, but their successors would find the balance of power a much more contentious issue. In the meantime, Charlemagne's role as a Christian emperor extended beyond his own borders. He became a patron of missions to the Slavs and Avars, extending the reach of Christendom into Eastern Europe. These efforts were as much about geopolitics as they were about spreading the faith. By converting neighboring tribes, Charlemagne could create a buffer zone of Christian allies, a medieval NATO of sorts, to protect against external threats. Yet, for all his efforts, Charlemagne's religious policies were not without their missteps. He might have been a man of grand visions, but the implementation was often less than flawless. Local customs and traditions proved stubbornly resistant to change, and the new converts were not always as devout as Charlemagne might have hoped. It turns out that swapping pagan rituals for Christian rites wasn't as straightforward as flipping a switch. And let's not forget the humorous side of Charlemagne's religious endeavors. Imagine a warrior king trying to navigate the intricacies of theological debate, a bit like watching a bull in a china shop attempt ballet. Charlemagne convened councils to settle religious disputes, displaying a mix of genuine interest and occasional bewilderment. His efforts to standardize liturgical practices were met with varying degrees of enthusiasm, with some clergy viewing his decrees as more of a royal suggestion than divine mandate. As we continue to unravel Charlemagne's legacy, it's clear that his religious policies were a complex tapestry of faith and power, idealism and pragmatism. His reign marked a turning point in the history of Europe, where the lines between church and state, spirituality and politics began to blur in ways that would shape the continent for centuries to come. So, as we leave Charlemagne pondering the heavenly and the earthly, remember that this story isn't over yet. The legacy of his reign, both the triumphs and the tribulations, continues to echo through history, reminding us that the path to greatness is rarely a straight line. Stay tuned, because our exploration of Charlemagne's world has more twists and turns than a Frankish forest path. There's plenty more to uncover, and trust me, the journey is just beginning. As Charlemagne's reign drew to a close, he faced the ultimate test of any ruler, ensuring his legacy endured beyond his own mortal coil. For Charlemagne, this meant not only cementing his achievements, but also managing the succession of his vast empire, a task as daunting as teaching a dragon to tap dance. With his health declining, the emperor had to navigate the tricky waters of inheritance, a perennial headache for monarchs throughout history. By the time Charlemagne shuffled off this mortal coil in 814 AD, at the ripe age of 72, he had built an empire that sprawled across much of Western and Central Europe. Yet, for all his achievements, his empire was like a grand sandcastle built at low tide, impressive but perilously close to the encroaching waves. Charlemagne, ever the planner, had divided his realm among his three legitimate sons, Charles the Younger, Pepin of Italy, and Louis the Pious. But if the history of royal succession has taught us anything, it's that dividing power among offspring is less about maintaining peace and more about setting the stage for a medieval version of Survivor. When Charlemagne's eldest son, Charles the Younger, died in 811, the balance of power shifted dramatically. This left Louis the Pious as the sole heir to the imperial crown, a position that was both a blessing and a burden. Pepin of Italy had also predeceased Charlemagne, leaving Louis with the daunting task of holding the empire together, a job that would test even the most seasoned diplomat, let alone a man known more for his piety than his political acumen. Louis, as his epithet suggests, was perhaps more suited for the monastery than the throne, a fact that would become painfully evident in the years following his father's death. Charlemagne's grand vision of a united Christian Europe was put to the test almost immediately after his passing. Louis the Pious found himself grappling with the perennial challenge of maintaining control over a diverse and sprawling empire. The Frankish tradition of partitioning lands among heirs, while intended to keep peace in the family, often resulted in a fractured realm as cohesive as a medieval jigsaw puzzle missing half its pieces. By 817, Louis had already begun planning for his own succession, dividing the empire among his three sons, Laraia, Pepin, and Louis the German. This decision, intended to ensure harmony, instead sowed the seeds of discord that would blossom into full-blown conflict in the years to come. The subsequent decades saw the empire wobble like a toddler taking its first steps. The Treaty of Verdun in 843, a mere 29 years after Charlemagne's death, formalized the division of the empire among his grandsons. It was a deal that carved up the once mighty realm into three distinct kingdoms, West Francia, East Francia, and Middle Francia, a geopolitical jigsaw that would ultimately lay the groundwork for the modern nations of France and Germany. The treaty was less a diplomatic triumph and more a reluctant compromise, a band-aid on the gaping wound of familial rivalry. In many ways, the Treaty of Verdun symbolized the fragile nature of Charlemagne's legacy. His vision of a unified empire, bound by Christian faith and Carolingian rule, unraveled as quickly as it had been woven. The empire, once a beacon of medieval power, became a patchwork quilt of competing interests and simmering tensions. The romantic notion of Charlemagne as a great unifier, the man who brought Europe under one banner, was tempered by the harsh reality of an empire that couldn't hold itself together once the emperor was no longer at the helm. Yet, for all its political fragmentation, Charlemagne's legacy endured in other ways. The Carolingian Renaissance, his efforts to revive learning and culture, laid the foundation for Europe's intellectual revival centuries later. Monasteries continued to function as centers of learning and literacy, preserving texts that would fuel the fires of the Renaissance in later centuries. The Carolingian minuscule, the script developed during Charlemagne's reign, became the standard for medieval manuscripts, a testament to the lasting impact of his cultural policies. Economically, Charlemagne's reforms had modernized the administration of the empire, providing a framework that future rulers would emulate. His emphasis on a strong central authority, while not always successful in his immediate successor's hands, influenced the development of governance across Europe. The very idea of an empire, a political entity that transcended the traditional boundaries of kingdoms and tribes, was a concept that Charlemagne helped to cement in the European imagination. Charlemagne's relationship with the Church also left an indelible mark on European history. The alliance between the papacy and the Holy Roman Empire, solidified during his reign, would continue to shape the continent's political landscape for centuries. The Church's role as a spiritual and temporal power, intertwined with the authority of secular rulers, became a defining feature of the medieval world, a legacy that Charlemagne, whether intentionally or not, helped to craft. In the end, Charlemagne's story is a reminder of the complexity of historical legacies. Here was a man who, through a combination of ambition, vision, and a fair share of luck, managed to carve out an empire that stretched the length and breadth of Europe. Yet, his achievements were as fragile as they were monumental, a testament to the challenges of leadership in a world defined by shifting allegiances and relentless ambition. Charlemagne's life was a symphony of triumphs and tribulations, a tale as rich and varied as the lands he sought to unite. His legacy is a tapestry woven with threads of power and faith, a reminder that the path to greatness is rarely straightforward. He was a man who dared to dream of a united Europe, a vision that, while never fully realized, continues to inspire to this day. As we close the book on Charlemagne's saga, it's essential to remember that history is shaped as much by its giants as by the countless individuals who walk in their shadow. The story of Charlemagne is not just about a single man or even a single empire. It's about the enduring power of dreams and the relentless pursuit of a vision, however flawed or fragile. In the end, Charlemagne's legacy is a testament to the human spirit, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, there is always the possibility of greatness. And with that, dear listeners, we bid farewell to Charlemagne, the man, the myth, the legend, a ruler whose shadow looms as large today as it did over a millennium ago. In a land where the jungle is as thick as the intrigue, and the monsoon rains pour as heavily as the ambitions of its rulers, the stage was set for a tale of epic proportions. Welcome to Southeast Asia in the early 9th century, a place where the political landscape was as treacherous as a snake pit, and just as unpredictable. Here, among the verdant canopies and ancient temples, emerged the Khmer Empire with its first grand act, Jayavarman II Declaration of Independence in 802 AD. Now, Jayavarman wasn't just staking a claim for a kingdom, he was essentially telling the rest of the neighborhood, "I'm the new boss, forget what you've heard about the old one." Let's get something straight right off the bat. The rise of the Khmer Empire wasn't a walk in the park, or rather, the jungle. Region was a patchwork of rival chiefdoms and petty kingdoms, each one jostling for power like contestants in a never-ending reality show. Think of it as the Game of Thrones, without the dragons, but with enough backstabbing and alliances to make even the Lannisters blush. Jayavarman II, our ambitious protagonist, was done with these petty squabbles. In 802 AD, he decided to up the ante by crowning himself the Chakravartin, or universal ruler, of a unified Khmer Empire. It was a bold move, but boldness was kind of his thing. But why did Jayavarman II think he could pull off such a daring power play? The answer lies in both his guts and the guts of the region's political dynamics. At this point, Southeast Asia was a bustling hub of trade routes and cultural exchanges. Indian influences were flooding in faster than you can say Sanskrit, bringing with them not only religion and art, but also a complex system of governance. Jayavarman saw an opportunity to synthesize these foreign ideas with local traditions, creating a hybrid model that could support a centralized state. This wasn't just about ruling a patch of land. It was about crafting a legacy that would stand for generations. Of course, the stories of divine kingship and celestial mandates are as tantalizing as they are misleading. While the mythology of Jayavarman's divine right to rule adds a layer of mystique, the reality was far less glamorous. Managing an empire was less about divine inspiration and more about logistical nightmares. Imagine trying to keep track of a sprawling territory with just a handful of messengers and a lot of wishful thinking. That's right, no Wi-Fi, no Google Maps, just sheer willpower and probably some very tired horses. The Khmer Empire's expansion was no overnight success either. Building an empire requires more than just grand declarations. It demands resources, alliances, and sometimes a little bit of ruthlessness. Jayavarman II had to consolidate power, often through strategic marriages and military conquests. It was a game of chess played with real lives, where each move had consequences that rippled across the land. At the heart of this burgeoning empire lay Angkor, a city that would become synonymous with Khmer greatness. But don't let the romantic tales of Angkor Wat's grandeur fool you into thinking it was all smooth sailing. Constructing such marvels required an immense labor force, not to mention the resources to feed and maintain them. The economy of the Khmer kingdom was heavily reliant on agriculture, particularly rice cultivation, which was the empire's lifeline. The empire's engineers were nothing short of geniuses, devising an intricate system of canals and reservoirs to control the water supply and ensure bountiful harvests. It was these innovations that fueled the empire's expansion, providing the sustenance needed to support a growing population and a formidable army. As the Khmer Empire grew, so did its influence. Jayavarman II's successors continued to expand the empire's reach, pushing its borders further and further. By the 11th century, the Khmer Empire stretched across much of present-day Cambodia, Thailand, Laos, and southern Vietnam. It was an empire built on ambition, ingenuity, and the occasional bit of skullduggery, a testament to the complexity and resilience of its people. Yet, with great power comes great responsibility, and the ever-present threat of internal strife. The Khmer rulers had to navigate a delicate balance of power, keeping both their subjects and rival factions in check. This was no easy feat, considering the diverse cultures and ethnicities within the empire. But through a combination of diplomacy, military might, and religious patronage, the Khmer kings managed to hold it all together, at least for a while. In the end, the story of Jayavarman II and the founding of the Khmer Empire is one of audacious ambition, strategic brilliance, and a fair bit of luck. It's a reminder that history is often more complex than the legends suggest, filled with the gritty realities of empire building. So, as we delve deeper into the rise of the Khmer Empire, let's keep in mind the real-world challenges these ancient rulers faced, even as they carved their names into the annals of history. And speaking of gritty realities, let's dive into the economic juggernaut that really kept the Khmer Empire's wheels turning: rice. Yep, that humble grain was the backbone of this ancient powerhouse. Forget gold or silver. For the Khmer, rice was the currency of choice, the original, if you know, insider tip. But how did they manage to turn their land into a veritable rice-producing machine? The answer lies in one of the most impressive feats of ancient engineering, the Khmer irrigation systems. Now, we're not talking about your garden variety ditches here. The Khmer Empire's irrigation network was nothing short of a hydraulic marvel. Picture this: sprawling reservoirs known as barrays, some stretching over 500 meters in length, linked by canals that crisscrossed the landscape like a spider's web. This wasn't just about watering crops. It was about transforming the very landscape to bend nature to human will. The West Barray, for example, covered a whopping 16 square kilometers and could hold up to 50 million cubic meters of water. That's enough to fill about 20,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools. Take that, modern civil engineering. These reservoirs did more than just feed the empire's insatiable appetite for rice. They were the lifeline that allowed the Khmer to cultivate multiple crops per year, defying the seasonal whims of the monsoon rains. In a world where climate unpredictability was the norm, this was nothing short of revolutionary. The labor demands were understandably gargantuan. Imagine coordinating thousands of workers, each hauling dirt and rocks without the aid of modern machinery. It was a logistical headache that would make even the most seasoned project manager weep. And just to clear up a romantic notion, the idea that this was all done by a society floating on a cloud of endless wealth is a bit of a fairy tale. Sure, the Khmer Empire might have looked like an ancient utopia from the outside, but beneath the surface, economic pressures were as real as a monsoon downpour. Maintaining such an irrigation system required constant upkeep and a steady stream of labor. Taxes, often paid in rice, kept the system oiled, but also added to the burden on the common people. And let's not forget the occasional famine. because Mother Nature loves a good plot twist. History records that these were not uncommon and could throw a serious wrench into the empire's plans. So, when you hear tales of Angkor's glittering temples and bustling markets, remember that they were built on the backs of hard-working farmers, engineers, and laborers. The wealth of the empire was not some inexhaustible resource. It was a precarious balancing act, one that required careful management, innovation, and sometimes a bit of luck. A bad harvest, a particularly harsh, dry season, or even a political squabble could send the whole system teetering. Let's put it in perspective with a modern analogy. Think of today's big infrastructure projects, like the Hoover Dam or the Three Gorges Dam in China. Massive undertakings with massive potential payoffs, but also fraught with risks and costs. The Khmer Empire's irrigation systems were similarly ambitious, with the added challenge of being constructed without modern technology or the internet to coordinate efforts. Imagine organizing a group chat with thousands of participants, all without smartphones. You'd have a better chance herding cats. But back to the task at hand. The Khmer's agricultural prowess was not just an exercise in engineering. It was a strategic necessity. Feeding a growing population and supporting a formidable military required more than just good intentions. It required foresight and adaptability. The rice fields were the empire's lifeblood, sustaining its people and its ambitions. And while the romantic tales of Angkor's glory might paint a picture of endless abundance, the reality was a constant game of economic Tetris, fitting together the pieces just right to keep everything from falling apart. As we peel back the layers of the Khmer Empire's economic engine, it's clear that the story is one of both grandeur and grit. The myths of endless wealth are tantalizing, but they gloss over the harsh realities of empire building. Beneath the glittering facade were the sweat and toil of countless individuals, each contributing to a system that, while impressive, was far from invulnerable. So, as we continue our journey through the annals of Khmer history, let's keep our eyes peeled for the stories that lie beneath the surface. The tales of ambition and ingenuity are compelling, but it's the human element, the struggles, the innovations, the triumphs against the odds, that truly brings this ancient world to life. And as we uncover the layers of this once mighty empire, let's remember that history is more than just names and dates. It's a tapestry of experiences, as rich and varied as the people who lived it. So, as we peel back the layers of the Khmer Empire's economic engine, it's clear that the story is one of both grandeur and grit. Speaking of grandeur, let's turn our gaze toward Angkor Wat, the piece de resistance of Khmer architecture. Built in the early 12th century under King Suryavarman II, this temple complex wasn't just any building project. It was a cosmic statement piece, a celestial flex on the global stage. You see, Suryavarman II wasn't content with just ruling an empire. He wanted to immortalize his legacy in stone. And what better way to do that than by constructing a temple that would make the gods themselves do a double take? Enter Angkor Wat, a sprawling 162. 6-hectare marvel, which is about the size of 300 football fields. That's right, folks, we're talking big. But hey, if you're going to build a heaven on earth, you might as well go large or go home. Now, let's dive into the nuts and bolts, or rather, the sandstone blocks and laterite foundations of this monumental endeavor. Angkor Wat wasn't built overnight. It took an estimated 300,000 workers and 6,000 elephants a whopping 37 years to complete. Imagine the logistics, coordinating thousands of laborers, each with their own hammer and chisel, working in the sweltering Southeast Asian heat. Forget herding cats. This was like trying to organize a rock concert where the headliner is a 215-foot-tall temple. The workforce was drawn from every corner of the empire, and they weren't exactly volunteers. This was state-mandated labor, folks. Imagine being told your summer job is to lug multi-ton stone blocks across the countryside. Not exactly a vacation in the Maldives. Yet, for all its grandeur, the construction of Angkor Wat was a testament to the sheer willpower, and let's be honest, the coercive power of the Khmer state. And speaking of stone blocks, let's talk materials. The temple was primarily constructed using sandstone quarried from the Kulin Hills, over 50 kilometers away. That's about the distance from Manhattan to Stamford, Connecticut, folks. These massive stones had to be transported using a network of canals and rivers, a feat of logistics that would make FedEx blush. The builders even used a sophisticated system of pulleys and levers, proving that ancient engineering was nothing to scoff at. But why go through all this trouble? What was Roman II trying to achieve with this grand design? Well, Angkor Wat was more than just a religious monument. It was a political power play. By dedicating the temple to Vishnu, Suryavarman was aligning himself with divine authority. It was a strategic PR campaign to cement his status as a god king, blending the celestial with the terrestrial in one grand architectural gesture. And let's not forget the economic implications. Building such a colossal structure required vast resources, and funding it was no small feat. The temple's construction was bankrolled by the empire's wealth, largely derived from its agricultural prowess and trade. The Khmer economy was like a tightly wound clock. Each cog needed to turn just right to keep the whole thing ticking. This massive outlay wasn't just a spiritual investment. It was a bet on the empire's continued dominance. Of course, the rosy image of a harmonious empire working together to build a heavenly abode obscures some less than divine realities. The labor conditions were, to put it mildly, grueling. The workers toiled day in and day out, facing both the scorching sun and the ever-present threat of disease. It was a tough gig, even by the standards of the ancient world. And let's not kid ourselves about the motivations behind such projects. Sure, the temple glorified the gods, but it also glorified Roman II. It was a strategic move to legitimize his rule, a stone testament to his divine right to govern. The temple wasn't just a place of worship. It was a colossal billboard proclaiming, "I'm the king, and I've got the biggest, baddest temple to prove it." The grandeur of Angkor Wat also served as a diplomatic tool. Visitors from far and wide, from China to India, were awed by its scale and beauty. It was a jaw-dropping sight, designed to inspire both reverence and a little bit of envy. In today's terms, it was like rolling out the red carpet, complete with fireworks and a marching band, every time a foreign dignitary came to town. But beneath the glittering facade of Angkor Wat lay a complex web of political maneuvering. Roman II's reign was marked by both diplomatic alliances and military campaigns. He was a master of strategy, but also knew when to wield the sword. His rule was a balancing act, keeping the nobles in line while expanding the empire's territory. The temple was part of this intricate dance, a symbol of both unity and dominance, drawing the eyes of the world to the Khmer Empire's heart. As we marvel at the majesty of Angkor Wat, it's important to remember the human cost behind its construction. The temple stands as a testament to the ingenuity and determination of its builders, but also as a reminder of the harsh realities of empire building. It's a story woven from ambition, power, and the sweat of countless laborers, each leaving their mark on history, one stone at a time. As we continue our exploration of the Khmer Empire, let's keep in mind the dual nature of these grand projects, the romance of their creation and the reality of their execution. In the end, Angkor Wat is more than just a temple. It's a mirror reflecting the complexities of an empire at its zenith, revealing a tapestry of ambition, faith, and the indomitable human spirit. But don't pack your bags just yet. There are still more stories to uncover in this ancient land. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the intricate dance of power, faith, and survival that define the Khmer Empire. So, as we delve into the spiritual tapestry of the Khmer Empire, let's start with the captivating dance between Hinduism and Buddhism that played out over its storied history. Imagine two heavyweight contenders, each with its own set of divine champions, cultural rituals, and philosophical claims. Yet, unlike your typical clash of titans, these two worldviews often coexisted, sometimes harmoniously, and at other times with all the tranquility of a cat in a room full of rocking chairs. In the early days, Hinduism was the heavyweight champ in Cambodia, riding in on the cultural coattails of Indian traders and settlers. By the time the Khmer Empire was flexing its muscles, Hindu gods like Vishnu and Shiva were already headlining the cosmic roster. The Temple of Angkor Wat, dedicated to Vishnu, was a celestial piece de resistance, proof that the Khmer rulers were keen on keeping the gods on side. But if you thought this meant a straightforward religious monopoly, think again. Buddhism was waiting in the wings, ready to steal the spotlight. Here's where the plot thickens. By the 12th century, Buddhism had begun its rise to prominence, thanks in part to the empire's increasing contact with neighboring Buddhist cultures. Enter King Jayavarman VII, the empire's most celebrated Buddhist king, who decided it was time to switch spiritual gears. His reign marked a significant shift toward Mahayana Buddhism, highlighted by monumental projects like the Bayon Temple, famous for its stone-carved smiling faces that look like they're hiding some cosmic joke. But let's not assume that this religious pivot was all sunshine and lotus petals. With new faith comes new tension. The transition from Hinduism to Buddhism wasn't like changing your favorite coffee brand. It was a seismic shift that affected everything from royal rituals to everyday life. Inscriptions from the period reveal a society in spiritual flux, with some Khmer rulers incorporating both faiths into their rule, perhaps hedging their bets in the celestial casino. Now, about those inscriptions and artworks. Think of them as the ancient equivalent of Instagram posts, offering glimpses into the daily lives and beliefs of the Khmer people. The bas-reliefs at Angkor Wat and the Bayon are like ancient social media feeds, capturing everything from battles to celestial beings engaging in divine yoga sessions. But beyond the grand depictions of gods and kings, these carvings reveal the daily grind of the empire's citizens. Picture farmers ploughing fields, traders haggling in bustling markets, and yes, even the ceremonial elephant baths, which sound about as practical as trying to shampoo a school bus. Speaking of elephants, these majestic creatures weren't just the empire's equivalent of a shiny sports car. They were integral to warfare and ceremonies, providing both muscle and a dash of spectacle. The ceremonial baths, a mix of practical necessity and ritualistic flair, ensuring the pachyderms were both combat-ready and spiritually cleansed. It's a tradition that seems bizarre to modern sensibilities, but to the Khmer, it was as normal as a Sunday car wash. Yet, beneath the surface of this religious melting pot simmered tensions that could make your average soap opera seem dull. The narrative of harmonious coexistence between Hinduism and Buddhism is a bit of a romanticized version, glossing over the inevitable power struggles and doctrinal disputes. Historical records, stone inscriptions and temple carvings alike whisper of ideological clashes as kings and courtiers navigated a tightrope of political and spiritual allegiances. And let's not forget the economic angle, because faith isn't just a matter of the heart, it's also a matter of the wallet. Temples and monasteries were economic powerhouses, commanding vast tracts of land and resources. The religious institutions often held as much sway as the secular rulers, acting as both spiritual guides and economic heavyweights. Donations to temples were common, serving as both a pious act and a savvy investment in divine goodwill. But here's the kicker. As Buddhism gained prominence, it started to reshape not just the spiritual landscape, but the social one as well. The emphasis on compassion and enlightenment began to influence governance and social policies, shifting the focus from divine kingship to a more people-centric approach. Yet this transition wasn't without its hiccups. The question of how to balance these competing faiths while maintaining political stability was a headache-inducing conundrum for the rulers of the day. In the end, the Khmer Empire's religious life was as complex as a Byzantine labyrinth, a testament to its cultural dynamism and adaptability. The blend of Hinduism and Buddhism created a unique spiritual mosaic, one that reflected the empire's broader synthesis of indigenous and imported influences. It was a spiritual stew, constantly simmering, with each ingredient adding its own flavor to the pot. As we continue our exploration of the Khmer Empire, let's keep peeking beneath the glossy veneer of myth and legend. The story is richer and more nuanced than the romantic tales suggest, filled with the gritty realities of faith, power, and human ambition. So stay tuned, because there are still plenty of layers to peel back in this ancient saga, and the journey is far from over. As we dig deeper into the Khmer tapestry, it's time to face the harsh reality that every empire, no matter how glorious, eventually has its curtain call. The Khmer Empire, with its grand temples and sophisticated irrigation systems, was no exception. By the 15th century, the empire's golden age had given way to a series of unfortunate events that would make even Lemony Snicket blush. This wasn't a sudden collapse, but rather a slow unraveling, like a once mighty sweater caught on a nail. First, let's talk water, because, believe it or not, the same element that fueled the empire's rise played a starring role in its downfall. The Khmer's elaborate irrigation system once the envy of the ancient world began to falter. Picture this. Unpredictable monsoon patterns, coupled with periods of severe drought, turned the once bountiful rice fields into arid patches. Add to this the maintenance issues that come with any aging infrastructure, rusty bolts, metaphorically speaking, and you have an agrarian economy teetering on the edge. And then there's the political scene, which resembled a game of musical chairs played by a bunch of hyperactive toddlers. By the 13th century, the Khmer were dealing with intensified pressure from neighboring states, particularly the rising power of the Ayutthaya kingdom. These guys weren't just knocking on the door. They were practically setting up a tent on the lawn. With external threats looming and internal divisions growing, the empire found itself in a geopolitical quagmire that would make any modern politician wince. Economically, the empire was no longer the powerhouse it once was. Trade routes shifted, bypassing Angkor in favor of more direct sea lanes. Imagine being a once bustling airport suddenly rerouted in favor of a new hub. The Khmer, accustomed to a steady flow of goods and tribute, found their coffers dwindling. And let's not forget the human factor. As opportunities dwindled, so did the workforce. People began voting with their feet, leaving the once vibrant cities for greener pastures, or at least ones less prone to flooding. Now, here's a kicker that would make any historian's eyebrows raise. The empire's decline wasn't just a result of external pressures or environmental woes. It also had a healthy dose of old-fashioned hubris. The Khmer rulers, wrapped up in their divine mandates and grandiose projects, failed to adapt to the changing world. They doubled down on monumental architecture and costly military campaigns when a little introspection might have been more prudent. It's a tale as old as time, really. Pride goeth before the fall and all that jazz. But before we sound the death knell, let's take a moment to reflect on the legacy. The Khmer Empire may have crumbled, but what it left behind is a testament to human ambition and creativity. Angkor Wat, today recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, stands as a monumental reminder of what human ingenuity can achieve. It's like the ancient world's version of a viral TikTok video, capturing the imagination of generations. Modern visitors to Angkor Wat might be awed by the intricate carvings and towering spires, but the real story is the perseverance and ingenuity of the people who built it. It's a reminder that behind every grand narrative are countless untold stories, each one a thread in the tapestry of history. The site's continued prominence is a testament to its enduring allure, drawing millions of tourists each year, all eager to walk in the footsteps of history. And while the Khmer Empire itself faded into the annals of time, its influence lingers on. The architectural innovations and cultural syncretism of the Khmer continue to inspire, serving as a poignant reminder that even the mightiest empires are not immune to the sands of time. So, what's the takeaway from this epic saga? It's simple. Empires rise and fall, but their legacies endure. They remind us of both the heights of human achievement and the pitfalls of unchecked ambition. Drawing parallels with modern empires, it's clear that the lessons of the Khmer are as relevant today as they were centuries ago. In a world where environmental challenges and geopolitical tensions remain ever present, the story of the Khmer serves as a cautionary tale. It's a reminder that sustainability and adaptability are not just buzzwords, but necessities for any society hoping to stand the test of time. So as you walk through the ruins of Angkor, or perhaps scroll through photos on your phone, remember that these stones speak of more than just history. They tell a tale of resilience and creativity, of a people who dared to dream on a grand scale. And while the empire itself may be gone, its spirit lives on, a timeless beacon in the annals of human endeavor. In the end, the story of the Khmer Empire is a complex tapestry, woven with threads of triumph and tragedy, innovation and oversight. It's a tale that continues to captivate, offering lessons for those willing to listen. As we draw this exploration to a close, let's carry forward not just the romance of Angkor's grandeur, but also the gritty realities of its rise and fall. After all, history is more than just a record of what was. It's a guide to what might be, if only we choose to learn.